The story begins with a thunderstorm raging over the city on a dark evening, with bright flashes of lightning illuminating the houses from above. A truck was rushing along the road at high speed. It was approaching a passenger car from behind. A terrified woman inside the car hugged her child. She screamed that they were being chased by people from the Ning family. The driver behind the wheel turned back with displeasure. He didn't know why they were being followed and said that he had already given up the fight for the inheritance. A group of criminals suddenly appeared on the road. They opened fire on the car. The car continued to speed down the road. The driver shouted that their pursuers had damaged the brakes and the car wouldn't stop. The doors wouldn't open either. To save her son, the woman threw him out of the side window at full speed. The man shouted in a frightened voice to his son to make sure he survives. The car lost control of the road and fell off the bridge into the water at full speed. 13 years later, the main character was on the deck of a huge cruise ship. Nin stood on the deck of the ship and looked attentively overboard. The guy thoughtfully said in front of himself that he needed to settle issues from 30 years ago in the Dragon City. The main character looked joyfully at the city in front of him and shouted that he was finally back. Nin heard disgruntled shouts from the side. The guy very angrily asked a passerby, "Is he really blind?" The girl complained to her friend Liang that some boy stepped on her shoes from the latest collection. The old man told the boy in a frightened voice that his child was small and didn't understand anything. He offered to pay for everything. Liang angrily told the passerby that he would not be able to pay even if he sold his child. The guy turned around and shouted at his guard to throw the old man to the fish. The fighter told the gentleman that he would do everything. The main character appeared from the side. He explained to the people around him that no one would touch anyone while he was there. Liang asked the guy angrily and discontentedly if he knew who this city belonged to. The protagonist asked Liang if he knew who the man standing next to him was. The frightened boy ran up to his grandfather and hugged him. The guy angrily explained to the main character that he didn't care about the old man. Nin explained to his partner in a dissatisfied voice that the old man was a firefighter and was injured in the fire. The main character angrily threatened his partner that he had to be killed here. The guy angrily told the main character that he comes from the Liang family and no one in this city dares to touch him. Ning became very angry and ran up to Liang to attack him. The protagonist angrily asked his partner, "Is the Liang family really that influential?" The main character suddenly extended his hand forward and grabbed the guy with it. He lifted him off the ground. Nin swung his arm and threw his opponent far to the side onto the ground with all his might. Nin said to the lying guy in an angry voice that he would now show him what real strength was. The main character was on the shore in the port. Near the shore was a huge cruise liner. The beaten Liang stood and held onto the guard. He threatened the protagonist that his men would beat him up. The main character looked calmly at Liang and did not respond to his threats. A group of guards in black suits appeared from the side. Liang angrily demanded that the main character come down to him. The main character looked at the guy on the ground with a smile and calmly and did not say anything to him. A group of warriors with weapons and in combat suits suddenly appeared from the side. They walked in unison towards the main character. Liang asked his friend in surprise who the warriors were walking before him. The excited man whispered to his boss that the blades of the King of the North were walking before him. A group of fighters approached and stopped near the ship's gangway. A shocked Liang stood nearby with his guards. The warrior raised his blade. He said something about the northern detachment in a menacing, stern voice. A group of fighters unanimously raised their blades and all together greeted the commander. The protagonist walked down the stairs. He told his subordinates with a smile to greet him simply by his name. The warrior bowed to the protagonist and said in a modest voice that they would not greet the commander by name. Ning told the fighter Mu Chen with a smile that he didn't expect him to meet him here. Chen asked the commander about his route and whether there were any problems. The protagonist told his subordinate that Liang had just stated that no one in the Dragon City would dare touch him. Liang and his soldiers were very scared. He shouted to the master, "What's wrong?" Chen looked at the guy with displeasure and said that this misunderstanding needed to be continued. The protagonist turned away. He told his subordinate that Liang Yu was the only one to blame for everything. The frightened boy asked Ning to spare him. The protagonist calmly turned away and closed his eyes. At that moment, one of his subordinates restrained Liang. The girl stood next to her grandmother. They had been waiting for the guy for half an hour, but he still hadn't arrived. The girl turned away with displeasure. She was tired of waiting for her groom and decided to leave. The old woman told the girl in a displeased voice that if she left, she would break her legs. A young man ran up from the side. He shouted to the old woman in a frightened voice as he ran, "The guest is already on his way!" The main character appeared from the side, accompanied by his fighters. They slowly walked towards the girl and her grandmother. The old woman excitedly told her partner, Chin He, that the boy had already arrived. The girl grabbed the grandmother's hand from the side and told her to calm down. A fighter with a blade appeared from the side. He told Mu Chen in a menacing voice that he had crossed the line and forgotten about the prohibition. The old woman stood behind her. She excitedly told the girl about Zhang Zhongquang's central blade and Mu Chen's northern tiger. The protagonist greeted Zhang with a smile and asked who he wanted to punish now. The fighter knelt before the protagonist and greeted the northern China commander. Ning explained to his partner that they were equals and such politeness was unnecessary. Zhang told his partner with admiration that all 5 great commanders were ready to serve him. The protagonist turned his gaze to the side. He looked closely at the old woman and the girl. The old woman approached the boy and put her hand on his shoulder. She said with excitement that he had grown up but had lost a lot of weight. Nin looked at his grandmother with great excitement and respect and called her. The old woman pulled the guy into the car after her. He shouted at her not to hurry so much. The protagonist stood near the car. He sternly ordered Chen and his group to return to northern China. Zhang had to go with him. Nin and his companions were driving in an expensive black car along a city street. The old woman sat in a chair. She glanced at the boy and said that 13 years had flown by very quickly. Ningbei had grown a lot. The main character told his grandmother that she protected him. Without her, he wouldn't have been able to grow up, and he would have died back then. The old woman put her hand on the girl's hand and said with a smile that her name was Qinhe. The passenger smiled broadly and said that her name was Su Qinhe. The main character told the girl that if she was against their wedding, then she could break off the engagement. Su jumped up joyfully. She didn't believe the guy's words. The old woman told the girl in a stern voice that she couldn't break off the engagement. Su told her grandmother with displeasure that she had arranged an engagement for her when she was a child. Everyone laughed at her. The old woman told the boy in a displeased voice that the wedding had been arranged by his grandfather. She didn't want to cancel it. Nin explained to his relative that the girl had her own head on her shoulders. The grandmother's mood changed. She asked the boy with a smile if he was familiar with the Central Blade, Zhang Zhongquang, and the Northern Tiger, Mu Chen. The protagonist gestured toward the fighter. He told his grandmother with a smile that Zhongquan sharpened and cleaned his sword very often. Zhang said in a stern voice that, "Not everyone can touch the sword of the King of the North." Su was very surprised when she heard that the fighter Zhang was cleaning the main character's sword. The main character said in a stern voice that if anyone offended the girl Su, he would destroy the offender's family. The protagonist told the fighter to announce to everyone that Su was under his protection. If anything happened to the girl, the culprit would be punished by the sword of the Northern King. The old woman was very happy when she heard such words from the guy. Su sat to the side and became embarrassed. The car stopped near a luxurious building. Servants ran out to greet the guests. The main character helped the old woman out of the car. He supported her under the arms. A man came out from the side and pointed angrily at the protagonist. He asked the old woman, "Why did she bring him here?" The owner looked at the guest with displeasure. He said that the grandmother still saved Ningbei during the accident and incurred the wrath of the three heads of the Ning family. The owner told the grandmother in a stern voice to break off the unnecessary engagement and get rid of the guy. The guests near the house supported the owner with angry voices. The guy shouted at the old woman to get rid of the guy. The girl looked at the guests from afar with displeasure. She thought that it was impossible to treat him like that. Zhang became angry and grabbed his blade. The protagonist pointed to the side and told the man to calm down. The old woman explained to her partners in an angry voice that the boy was her son-in-law. She threatened that no one would dare to offend him. Su reminded her grandmother in a displeased voice that she herself was against this marriage. Nin smiled at his grandmother and said that he would treat the girl like a little sister. The boy smiled and told the old woman that if he broke off the engagement himself, it would reflect badly on the Su family's reputation. If she signed the document renouncing the engagement, he would sign it tomorrow. Su asked the guy with concern if this would damage his reputation. Nin answered the girl with a smile that it was all nonsense. The owner told the guy in an excited voice that if he didn't mind, they would break off the engagement. An excited Zhang swung his blade wide. He shouted at the people that if they did this, he would kill their entire family. The protagonist extended his hand and stopped his subordinate. The man asked the boy with displeasure, "Where did he get so much courage to destroy his family?" The fighter told the man in an angry voice that he was the commander of Central China. This should be enough to destroy their family. The commander of Mu Chen appeared from the side. He told the man that this would be enough to destroy their family. The southern commander named Guo Baifeng also approached. He said in an evil voice to the man that this would be enough to destroy their family. A western commander named Lu Guai approached the owner. He threatened with a smile that this would be enough to destroy his family. The fighters named Mu Chen and Zhang Zhongquang looked at the man very angrily and silently. Two warriors named Guo Baifeng and Lu Gui looked calmly ahead. They were ready to protect the protagonist. Nin looked ahead happily. He thought that 4 of the 5 commanders were now standing before him. Guo bowed and greeted the protagonist next to him. Lu Gui also greeted the return of the king. The guests were very surprised. They couldn't understand why such important people were here next to them. Mu angrily asked his frightened rivals if they really thought that their family was so powerful that they couldn't destroy it. The guy at the side said in a bolder voice that he considered his family truly invincible. The old woman told the boy in an angry voice that he was very presumptuous. Nin supported the grandmother and told her not to worry. After a short pause, the grandmother said that she was irritated by the boys from the Su family, who did not understand what they were doing. The protagonist turned around and told the fighter to show his opponents what they were capable of. Zhang looked at his watch. He shouted in a loud voice that a level A1 alert had begun. A loud scream echoed throughout the surrounding area. A level A alert could be heard throughout the city. In a large, high-rise building, someone confirmed the alarm. A group of workers stood near large tables with monitors. Someone shouted an alarm. The girl held a folder in her hand. She said in a stern voice that an alarm had been activated in 72 locations. Everyone must go to combat readiness. The man stared intently at the girl's hologram on his wristwatch. His partner had told him that if she carried out the order, it would affect ordinary people. The Dragon Guard would be on guard. The protagonist told his subordinate in a sly voice that 1 point would be enough. Zhang replied that he understood everything. Zhang excitedly told his partner that he was canceling the previous order. 1 group would be enough. The girl answered the commander in a stern voice that she understood him. The subordinate asked his superior with interest who the guy was who had just spoken to their commander. The girl collapsed into a chair. She told her surprised colleagues that the man who had spoken to their commander was an ordinary guy named Ningbei. The worker told his partner with surprise that Ninbei was called the King of the North and the God of War. The boss sat on a chair. She told her subordinates that even she knew little about the main character. His file was on the 9th floor and was closed even to her. A surprised man stood on the street. The other guests behind him looked at each other in confusion. The guy said in a dissatisfied voice that there was a lot of chatter but nothing happened. He decided that they were just hired actors. The stranger picked up the phone and said in an angry voice to his rivals that he could hire someone now too. The guy looked at his phone with great surprise. He discovered with horror that he had no connection. Guests near the building were surprised. They looked at their phones and noticed that they had no signal. The owner looked at the guy in surprise. He decided that it was Nin who had managed to destroy the telephone connection. A group of fighters appeared from the side. They entered the estate through the gate. The girl shouted that a Dragon Guard operation was underway. All outsiders were ordered to disperse. The commander waved her hand to the side. She shouted in an angry voice at her subordinates to arrest the Su family. The host and his guests looked at the girl in front of him with great fear. Nin calmed the old woman down. He told her not to worry. The guest just needed to be taught a lesson. The main character told his grandmother in a sly voice that he would need to visit his family again today. The old woman told the guy in a thoughtful voice that all this happened 13 years ago. After a short pause, Nin answered his grandmother that 13 years had passed, but he would never forget that rainy night. After a short pause, the guy got ready to leave. He told the grandmother and the girl that he needed to go. Suddenly, the old woman shouted after the boy in an angry voice that his mother was not dead. The main character was surprised. He turned around and looked at the old woman with great distrust. The grandmother explained to the boy that his surviving mother worked as a professor at the university. The main character didn't answer his grandmother. He walked slowly down the street. There was no one around. Nin arrived at the Dragon City University. He decided to check if his mother was working inside. A woman in a wheelchair sat on the stage in the auditorium. Several students sat and listened to her. Nin entered the classroom and looked around carefully. Bored students were sitting at their desks. The protagonist looked ahead in surprise. He realized that his mother was indeed alive. Nin sat down at his desk. The student told her friend that she was very bored and wanted to go play outside. The guy cheerfully replied that she could go. Her father was the vice dean. The student explained to her friend that she needed to write a note to leave. The student explained to his partner that the professor could only get promoted if she established a reputation as a strict and responsible woman. The student glared at the teacher. He said she could make a living with her body if only she weren't completely paralyzed. The protagonist from his seat angrily demanded that the guy be more respectful to the professor. The student angrily asked the guest who the hell he was. The student asked the main character with displeasure. Is the student really his mother? Nin suddenly threw himself onto the desk and slammed the stranger's head into the table with all his might. The girl next to him got scared and screamed. The protagonist called out to his mother in a weakening voice. He approached her across the auditorium. The surprised teacher asked the guy with fear, "Is it really him?" The woman in the wheelchair grabbed the boy with her arms. She couldn't believe it was him. Nin happily hugged his mother. In the university courtyard, a man was sweeping the street with a broom. The protagonist and his mother were walking towards him. The woman in the wheelchair smiled and told her husband to look who had come to see them. The main character greeted his father with a smile and joy. The man called his son in a weakening voice. He was very happy to see him. The main character and his father hugged. A woman sat in a wheelchair nearby and smiled. The father grabbed the boy in fear and asked why he had come back. It was still unsafe here. In a menacing voice, he promised father that he would use the blade of the Northern King to wash away all the shame and injustice they had endured for 13 years. The protagonist was walking across the square with his parents. He suggested going home. A girl appeared from the side. A man and 2 guards stood next to her. The daughter pointed out the main character to her father and said that he beat up her boyfriend. The man angrily asked the protagonist if he really had beaten up a student right there in the classroom. A frightened man told the deputy director that his son was standing next to him. The boss angrily demanded that the employee teach the boy discipline. The deputy director sternly reminded the employee that he had previously stood on his knees before him and begged for a job. The son asked his father in surprise when he had been kneeling and what had happened. The man excitedly explained to the boy that the deputy director came from a Ning family. The guy looked ahead with displeasure and said that the dog came from the Nin family. The worker asked his partner with displeasure who he had called a dog. The protagonist turned around and menacingly demanded that the official kneel before him. A bright blast wave passed towards the guy. It hit the man's legs. The man suddenly fell to his knees on the ground. The daughter asked him in fear, "What is he doing?" The protagonist was pushing his mother in a stroller. He told the woman that he would make the deputy director pay for all the hardships and insults they had endured over the years. The man was on his knees and couldn't get up. He shouted that his legs were broken. A frightened security guard tried to help him from the side. The main character, together with his parents, arrived at his house and went up to the floor. The man opened the apartment door. His wife told him to go to the store for groceries. She wanted to make lunch for their son. The father told his son to take care of his mother's wheelchair. He wanted to carry her downstairs. The son asked his parents with great surprise, "Have they really lived here all this time?" The man turned to the side. He told his son with a smile that this place was nice, except for the humidity. The protagonist called his subordinate over from the side. Zhang immediately ran up to him. Ning sternly ordered his subordinate to send people here to collect the things and transfer the parents from here. Zhang replied to his partner that he would do everything. The mother told her son in a sad voice not to worry, and that they had already gotten used to such conditions. The protagonist reminded his mother in an angry voice that 13 years ago, they were driven into a dead end, which led to a sad end. The boy grabbed his mother's stroller with his hands. He told her that he would return to the capital and kill 3 people. The first of them would be Nin Fukuo. A warrior appeared from the side. He informed his companions that the commander of Eastern China had arrived. The commander, with a blade in his hands, proudly told the protagonist that he had received the sword of the King of the North. The fighter smiled and told the protagonist that he wanted to play with the blade for a couple more days. Nin turned around and shouted at his subordinate to stop talking nonsense. He demanded the blade for himself. The subordinate threw the sword to his master. The protagonist caught it with his hand. Nin held a sword in his hands. He looked at it silently and with interest. The protagonist turned around and shouted at the soldiers to keep their distance. He wanted to talk to his parents. The commander at the side told the man that he couldn't imagine who could have forced the boss to take up the sword of the King of the North. Zhang excitedly explained to his partner that it had to be a real villain. The commander demanded in a sly voice that his partner tell him everything. He threatened to dig up his ancestor's grave. Zhang excitedly told the fighter that the protagonist's opponents would be the Ning family. They weren't particularly strong, but that wasn't a reason for leniency. Guests gathered near the palace entrance. They were carrying a large box containing a gift. A young man joyfully shouted that they were giving the patriarch a golden voodoo for his birthday. The servant joyfully shouted that Mr. Liang was presenting a 100-year-old ginseng and 16 jade bracelets. The head of the Eastern Textile Factory presented the patriarch with 2 Ming Dynasty vases and wished him good luck and a long life. Suddenly, a noise was heard from the side. The party guests turned away in fear. A group of fighters in mourning clothes walked down the street. They carried a huge coffin. Guo walked in front of them. The warrior told the people in an angry voice that they had brought an iron bell and an old coffin as a gift from an old friend. Suddenly, the bell from above fell to the ground. The guests near the building were very scared. Guo turned around and in a stern voice demanded that his subordinates all cry. The guy said in a frightened voice that the bell was an unfavorable omen. The guest said in a displeased voice that people had come to them to cause trouble. The owner came out in dark clothes. He asked the guests, why did they have such resentment towards the Nin family? Guo said to the man with an evil smile that there were no grievances in the Dragon City. The warrior placed his hand on top of the bell. He said that finding such a large object on the northern border was very difficult. The man thought to himself in fear about the guy's words about the northern border. The man saw the main character and immediately realized that he was the son of Ning Kanglin and Qing Honglin. The owner looked closely at the guy and realized that it was Ninbei in front of him. The main character told his second cousin in an angry voice that he had come to wish him a long life. The guests at the party were very surprised when they realized that in front of them was Ninbei, who had escaped 13 years ago. The old man looked at the protagonist and said with a smile that he would buy a new chair for the Honglan woman. Nin told the man in a sharp and angry voice not to buy anything. A partygoer told the guests in an angry voice to get out of here. The host, with an evil smile, told the guests to move on. He invited them to talk. The host decided it wasn't time to publicly reveal his past family problems. He decided to finish off his guests privately. The protagonist and his family prepared to enter the estate. At that moment, someone tripped his father. Nin sharply put his hand out to the side. He kept the man from falling to the ground. The guest told the man in an angry voice that everyone should kneel on the day of the patriarch's birthday celebration. Nin stepped aside with his mother. He told father that they were the main characters in today's performance. They didn't need any distractions. Guo jumped out from the side with a blade against the guests. He said in an angry voice that he would take care of this rabble. The fighter swung his 2 swords wide and prepared to attack his opponent. The stranger screamed loudly after the Guo threw a weapon at him and hit him in the legs. The guests were amazed. They looked at the wounded boy and said that this was the technology of the northern capital and the cold blade of the north. The owner told the main character in an angry voice that he was going too far. Nin turned around and explained to the man that he hadn't gone far yet. He had only just begun. The man asked the guy in a frightened and excited voice what he wanted to do. The protagonist placed his hand on the sword. He said in an angry voice that he would now destroy the Nin family. Inside the tall, bright building, people gathered to celebrate a birthday. An old man in red clothes stood near the table and thanked everyone who came to congratulate him. The doors on the side suddenly opened. Zhang was standing at the entrance, and Guo was next to him. The main character entered the room with his parents. He wished his second grandfather a long life. The host and other guests looked at the main character with great surprise. The old man took the glass in his hands. He thanked the guy for his congratulations with a smile. Liang approached from the side. In an angry voice, he told the protagonist to kneel before him. Guo asked his partner with great displeasure who he thought he was. Liang Xiaolong said in an angry voice that everyone in the Dragon City knows him. No one can treat him without respect. Guo smiled and told the guy that he was hearing about him for the first time. A stranger was sitting on a chair to the side. He told Liang in an angry voice that some insect had come to him that didn't even know his name. Guo turned around and demanded that Xiao Yushan come to him. The fighter headed towards his commander. The old man realized with great surprise that the commander of the Xiao detachment stood in front of him. The commander, with a malicious smile, explained to his subordinate that the unknown fat man had insulted him. He asked how they would settle this. Xiao sternly pointed his hand at the frightened guest and said that he needed to be chopped into mince and fed to the dogs. Zhang ran up to the fighter from the side and sharply demanded that he stop pretending. The man looked angrily at the guest and said that he should be stripped of all his property, including his subsidiaries. The soldier bowed to the commander and said that he would do everything. The frightened man covered himself with his hands. He did not understand how this could be possible. Guo slapped the guy across the face with all his might. He shouted at him to not even hope to escape. Guo continued to beat the boy. The mother, standing at the side, asked her son what he had promised her. The protagonist approached the fighter from behind and demanded that he step aside. The subordinate turned around with a smile and replied that he obeyed. The old man angrily realized that his enemies had bribed the commander of the Xiao detachment to help them. The owner stood near the table. He reminded Commander Xiao that his organization had never interfered in their internal affairs before. He asked what had changed today. The main character sternly demanded from the guests that those of them who were not connected to the Nin family leave as soon as possible. The guests began to leave the room in fear. The protagonist stood next to his parents. The old man angrily asked the guy who would protect him now without the squad leader. Guo cunningly told the owner that they could defend themselves even without Xiao Yushan. The owner turned to his subordinate Kang and demanded that he throw out the guests. The fighter replied to the grandfather that he would do everything. The warrior leaped forward, a dark aura glowing around him. The old man sat at the table. He said in a thoughtful voice that he hadn't expected the Ning family to have its own primary level master. The protagonist stepped forward with his weapon. His frightened mother called out to him from the side. Kangoo rushed forward sharply. He shouted to the guests that he would now sweep them all out of the way. The protagonist activated a protective dome around himself. The fighter was amazed. He couldn't hit his opponent in any way. Nin looked angrily at the fighter and shouted for him to kneel before him. A powerful energy spread out around the protagonist in all directions. Kangoo fell to his knees before him. The owner jumped up and slammed his hands on the table. He didn't understand what was happening in front of him. Kangoo was on his knees. He said in a frightened voice that he felt the level of the god of war. Kangoo was on his knees and couldn't get up. People around him were shocked and couldn't understand what had happened to him. The protagonist intensified the energy flows around him. He shouted at his rivals to kneel before him. All the guests fell to their knees in front of the guy. They couldn't stand on their feet any longer. Guo looked at the protagonist with pride. He told the old man that Kangoo could not be a full-fledged opponent for Ninu. The astonished owner looked ahead. He couldn't understand how all this could be possible. Guo approached and told the surprised old man that the protagonist had renounced his title as King of the North. The frightened mother looked at her son. She said in a worried voice that he had endured a lot of suffering during his years on the northern border. Nin turned around. He explained to his mother in a very joyful voice that he was okay. The main character told the people in the hall in an angry voice that 13 years ago on a rainy night, they killed his grandfather. Nin told his partners in a stern voice that his fourth uncle was killed with a knife only because he helped him escape. The protagonist angrily told people that he had seen it all with his own eyes. The old man and the man looked at the guy in fear. Nin told his rivals in an angry voice that if he did not avenge his relatives, he would not be able to satisfy his hatred. The frightened owner began to apologize to the protagonist. He shouted that he was wrong. The protagonist grabbed his sword. He shouted that Kangoo wanted to kill him and that now he would spare no one. The boy grabbed the sword with his hands. He shouted that if it weren't for the grandmother from the Su family, he could have died that night at the hands of the attackers. The protagonist abruptly waved his hand to the side. He shouted loudly that there were no innocents in the Ning family. The blade plunged into the floor. The old man looked at the sword on the floor in fear. He shouted in an excited voice that this was karma. The owner suddenly jumped up. He ran to the sword to snatch it from the floor and take it for himself. The old man realized with surprise that he couldn't reach the blade. It was as if it had grown there. Nin told his grandfather in an angry voice that the sword weighed 360 kilograms and he couldn't lift it. The protagonist suddenly ran up and drew his sword. He used it to strike the old man with a powerful blow. The man, frightened, called out to his father. The owner angrily rushed forward towards the protagonist. He threatened to fight him to the death. Nin stood there, and with a calm movement pierced the man who ran up with his blade. The owner fell dead to the floor. The protagonist said in a calm voice that the fourth uncle could now rest in peace. The guests around jumped up in surprise and looked at the murdered host. They were very scared. The protagonist turned away. He angrily threatened that Kangoo would kneel here for the rest of his life. He would feel his parents' pain firsthand. The main character approached his father and told him with a smile that he would now become the head of the Nin family. Nin told his mother that he wanted to visit his fourth uncle's grave. He asked his parents to wait for him. The protagonist went outside. The Mu fighter threw his black cloak over his shoulders. At that moment, a car with its headlights on pulled up from the side. The main character stood surrounded by his fighters. Lu turned around in surprise. He didn't understand who had just arrived to see them. A servant with an umbrella in his hand opened the car door. A man came out from inside. The stranger stood near the car. He said angrily that he wanted to see who dared to injure the eldest grandson of the Liang family. The protagonist stood surrounded by his subordinates. Next to them stood a group of unfamiliar fighters. Lu grabbed his blade. He shouted to the people around him that he would clear the way now. Guo reached out and stopped his colleague. He explained that it was forbidden to draw a sword here. A servant with an umbrella in his hands told his master that the Su family's car was standing in front of them. The man was surprised to see an old woman appear in front of him with her granddaughter. Guards were standing next to them. The son told his father in a frightened voice that the Su family was in decline. They had no need to fear the old woman. The man explained to the boy that the Su family had a very strong foundation. Even after the woman's death, they would survive. The old woman angrily asked Mr. Liang, "Did he really come to wish happiness to the patriarch of the Ning family?" Mr. Liang said in an angry voice that he was not ready to congratulate the murderer of his own elder brother. The guest pointed his finger sternly at the protagonist. He sternly demanded that the boy answer for wounding his eldest grandson. A guy leaned out of the car from the side. He confirmed that it was Nin who hit him. Guo told the man in an angry voice that they would no longer be able to get an answer from the deceased Ning Fukuo. The guest was amazed. He couldn't understand how Ning Fukuo could die on the day of his 80th birthday celebration. Guo said in a cunning voice that death could sneak up on a person at any moment. The old woman sternly told the man that she wanted to settle the matter with his grandson. She advised him to return home. Mr. Liang was very unhappy that Ning Fukuo had passed away. Lady Su advised him to leave. The man looked at the protagonist with displeasure. He didn't understand where this guy from the Ning family came from. The guest raised his hand with the rosary to his head and wanted to say something important. The guy from the car angrily asked Grandpa, "Did he really just decide to leave all this like that?" The man angrily told father from the side that the protagonist had struck them all after he had struck Xiaolong. The old woman sternly told the man that out of the 7 great families of the Dragon City, only 6 might remain. The guest told the grandmother in a stern voice, "Someone must answer for the attack on his eldest grandson." Guo from the side. He approached the main character and wanted to advise him something now. The protagonist extended his hand to the side. He told the man that he would not hand over his younger brother to him either. There was a long pause. Liang stood in the rain and looked very attentively at the main character. The man called out to the fighter in an angry voice. After that, the warrior suddenly jumped out from the side. The fighter said in a stern voice that his name was Liang Feiluo, and he was from the Liang family. Su told the protagonist in a frightened voice to be careful. The 4th most powerful fighter in their city was in front of him. The old woman calmed the girl down. She reminded her that the main character promised to always protect her. Nin looked closely at his girlfriend. He decided to show her the difference in levels between martial arts masters today. The protagonist, clad in his black cloak, turned sharply to the side. He said in a stern voice that the Feiluo were much stronger than ordinary people. A bright glow appeared around the protagonist. He said that the most powerful one is the god of war. Nin stood, and bright lightning flashed around him. He shouted that there was a powerful aura around the god of war. It could suppress an entire army. The protagonist turned around and looked at the girl. He explained to her that he had not lied to her when he promised to protect her. Su looked at the guy with great admiration. She realized that he was about to help her. Nin glared ahead. He said that there were over 100 war gods under his command on the northern border. Feiluo looked at the guy with fear. He realized that his opponent would be very dangerous. A huge demonic snake appeared above the protagonist. A fighter to the side shouted in admiration that the protagonist was the strongest in the northern border garrison. Nin sharply extended his hand to the side. He attacked his opponent with energy. Feiluo didn't have time to defend himself. He noticed with horror how a bright flash attacked him. The fighter fell to the ground after a powerful attack from the main character. His surprised colleague stood to the side. The warrior rose from the ground. He developed a bloody cough. The man greeted Uncle Liang in a frightened voice. The guest asked the man very displeasedly, "Has he really returned to the Nin family?" The man explained to the guest that the boy wasn't very familiar with etiquette. He invited him into the main hall. The protagonist's father smiled and told the guest to pass on. Liang looked at him with disbelief. After a short pause, the guest told the man that his etiquette was much better. Mr. Liang, accompanied by his guards, headed toward the building. Guo and the man were waiting for them near the entrance. The protagonist, accompanied by his father, entered the room. Armed guards stood at their sides. The guest looked around at the fighters in surprise. He didn't know what the Ning family had planned. The man was surprised to see a ninja Gu fighter kneeling on the floor right in front of him. Liang walked past the warrior. He remembered that this fighter was a powerful martial artist. Still, he was brought to his knees here. The protagonist and his companions walked through the room. There were still traces of blood on the floor below. Liang thought to himself that as soon as he listened to the old woman Su, great changes occurred in the Ning family. The protagonist supported his grandmother from behind with his hands. He told her to sit in the place of honor. The guest silently prepared to sit down in his seat. His son stood behind him. The old woman turned around and sternly demanded that the girl find Aunt Qing. Su looked at her grandmother with fear. Liang looked at the man with interest. He asked, "Has he really returned to the Ning family?" The grandmother glanced slyly at the man. She said that Canlin was the new head of the Ning family. Liang turned around and looked at the man with great surprise. He was amazed when he realized that he would be the new head of the family. Canlin smiled at the elders and said that he hoped for their support. He himself had no special talents. Canlin gestured sideways at the protagonist. He told the guests that he wanted to introduce them to Ningbei, the eldest son of the third generation. The guest smiled and said that he was pleased to meet such a worthy young man. The old woman told the guest with a smile that there were still many promising young men in the younger generation of their family. Liang said in an angry voice that the boy was a disgrace to the family compared to the young Bei. The man jumped to his feet. He said with a smile that it was time for him to go home since it was late. The main character, along with his parents, said goodbye to the guests at the exit. Liang clenched his fist joyfully. He said that Dragon City is expecting great changes. The discarded son of the Ning family has returned. Canlin asked his son with fear where he was going so late. Nin answered his father that he still wanted to visit the graves and would be back soon. The protagonist arrived at the cemetery. He saw several graves there that had been opened. The main character looked ahead with a piercing and very hateful gaze. The guy looked at the destroyed graves. He told his companions in a stern voice that he needed to conduct an investigation now. A frightened man sat inside the office. He asked the guests in surprise who they were and what they wanted. Zhang sternly asked the man who had taken the ashes from the two graves in the northeastern part of the cemetery. The worker was very scared. He answered the guests in a trembling voice that he did not know the answer to their question. The angry man grabbed his blade. He didn't like the fact that his partner didn't know the answer to his question. The man fell to his knees near the table. He shouted to the fighter that the young couple was to blame for everything. They had come 7 years ago. Zhang asked his partner in surprise how he remembered who came to see him 7 years ago. The worker, with tears in his eyes, said that he was paid 100,000 for his silence. The man threw a small piece of paper in front of the guy. He told the frightened worker to tell him in detail what happened. He would get the same amount of money. The protagonist walked up to the gravestone and placed his hand on it. Mu stood next to him. Nin heard his subordinate approach from behind. He asked the fighter, "What happened?" Zhang handed the boy some documents. He explained that 7 years ago, a young couple, a man and a woman, had collected ashes from the graves. The guard gave a description. The protagonist demanded that his subordinate draw portraits of the perpetrators. He added that the soldiers should not regret it when they found the kidnappers. The protagonist looked away thoughtfully. He said in a dissatisfied voice that Mukin could use his influence in northern China to achieve his goal more quickly. The protagonist told his fighters to return with him. He prepared to leave. The man was sitting at the table and reading documents. He suddenly put his hand on his face. The boy entered the room. He told father that he needed to rest. The canal at the table happily greeted the boy. The protagonist sternly asked the man, "Were there really financial problems with the Ning family?" Canlin answered his son with fear. That was putting it mildly. The father told his son that the family business was going very badly. The family was in billions of dollars of debt. The company's shares were mortgaged. The main character looked happily at his father and said that he could figure all of this out. The rain continued to rage outside the windows. The mother in the stroller told the boy that he shouldn't shoulder all the Nin family's problems. The protagonist turned around and asked the girl in surprise, "Did she really decide to stay here?" Sue explained to the boy that grandmother asked her to stay and talk to Auntie Qing. The woman in the stroller told the boy not to worry about it. She added that his father would take care of everything. Nin grabbed the phone in his hands. He told the woman not to worry. It was all nonsense. The protagonist called. His partner told him that the president was currently resting. He needed to call back tomorrow after 9 in the morning. Nin demanded on the phone that the president wake up quickly. He needed to call back immediately. The mother in the wheelchair sternly told the boy that he had asked for help very rudely. Canlin looked at the protagonist with fear and asked who he had called. Nin answered the man that he had called a friend. The boy headed towards the exit of the room. He told his parents that he was going to the kitchen and have a snack. Sue turned away with displeasure. She told the protagonist that no one would want to help him if he asked like that. The phone on the table rang. The girl and the woman looked at it in surprise. People looked at the phone on the table in surprise. Canlin said with excitement that they had received a video call. The man reached for the phone. He saw his partner smiling. Sue said with alarm that the richest man in the world, Chao Shi, had called them. The man looked at the phone in surprise. He realized that his son had simply spoken to the richest man in the world. Chao asked the man over the phone who he was. Canlin explained to his partner that his son had just left. He could tell the guy to call later. The partner waved his hand happily. He told the surprised man that he was completely free. The protagonist entered the room with a tray of fruit. The man excitedly shouted to the boy that Mr. Chao had called him. Chao greeted the guy and called him, "Your Majesty." Ning explained to his partner that he could simply call him by his first name. He was at home. The man told the boy that he couldn't answer him because he didn't have his phone at hand. The protagonist slyly reminded the man that he owed him a favor. That's why he called. Chia reminded the boy with a smile that 3 years ago he had saved both him and his family. He was ready to help him. The girl was surprised when she realized that the boy had saved the billionaire's life. The protagonist told his partner on the phone that he needed a certain amount of money to pay off his debts. He turned around and asked his father, "How much money do they need?" Canlin told the boy with concern that the family had large debts. 8 billion was in principal and several short-term debts. Chow told the guy with a smile that he would give him $10 billion, which was not even close to what Ning did for his family. The protagonist asked his father, "Will 10 billion be enough for them?" After a short pause, Chow explained to the boy that he could add another $10 billion. The girl was very surprised when she heard the amount. Canlin jumped up near the table. He asked his son with excitement, "Is this really the first time he's talked about dollars?" After a short pause, the man said to the guy with a smile that they currently needed no more than 2 billion. Chow was very surprised when he heard his partner say they only needed 2 billion. The man promised the billionaire that they would return the money after they overcame their current difficulties. Chow explained to the man that it would be a gift for them and that there would be no need to return anything. Canlin, in a frightened voice, explained to his partner that they could not accept such a large sum as a gift. After the conversation, the man said in an excited voice that Mr. Chow was a very generous and sincere person. Ning happily thought to himself that Chow was a cunning businessman who wanted him to remain in his debt. Nin looked slyly at his father. He said that if he was satisfied, then they could all go to bed. The protagonist turned around and asked the girl if she would have a test tomorrow. Sue asked the guy with interest. How would he know? Nin turned around and told the girl to go to bed early. He promised to pick her up tomorrow. The next day, an expensive car stopped near the educational institution. There were a lot of people near the entrance. The man opened the door and told the girl that they had already arrived. A student on the street asked the girl who had just given her a ride in the Ning family's car. The main character was sitting in the car. He opened the window and carefully watched the girls from the side. The student slyly asked the girl who was with her, "Who was this handsome guy?" Sue was shy and didn't know what to answer. The girl looked at the car and told her friend that her fiancé, whose name was Ninbei, was sitting there. A stranger asked a guy what university he was studying at. Sue explained to her friend that her friend wasn't studying anywhere. The protagonist explained to his partner that he had indeed never studied anywhere, but he had attended the Balian Military Academy. A surprised student wearing glasses ran up from the side. He asked his partner with interest, "Did he really study at the Balian Academy?" The student asked Duyan's friend, "Did he really know this academy?" A guy came up to me from the side and said in a dissatisfied voice that this academy was third-rate. He explained to his partner in a dissatisfied voice that his brother had studied there. The student passed by. He told the disgruntled Du as he walked that his brother was the hope of the entire village. The door to the side of the car opened and the main character stepped out. He headed towards his girlfriend. The female students looked at the boy with fear. They thought it would be bad if he started a fight again. Sue asked the guy with concern, "Why did he get out of the car?" She reminded him that he was in a hurry to get home. Nin was unhappy because she wanted to send him away. The student was unhappy because the main character prevented him from further courting his girlfriend. The student told the protagonist that his name was Xu Zhengxiang. He had never heard of Baliang Military Academy. The protagonist looked at the guy silently. He didn't answer him at all. She got angry. He couldn't understand why his partner completely ignored his words. The main character said in a calm voice that all sorts of idiots shouldn't know about the existence of the Balian Military Academy. The student next to her became very angry. She thought the main character was also talking about her. Sue calmed her friend down and said the guy was definitely not talking about her. Du adjusted his glasses. He said with a smile that the Balian Military Academy is considered the birthplace of great generals. She asked the protagonist what his rank was at the academy. Nin answered his partner that he was just an ordinary person. Du was surprised when he realized that his partner at the academy was an ordinary person. Shuri angrily told the protagonist that he had simply decided to fool them. The girl told her friend in an angry voice that the main character would definitely not lie to them. She demanded that he stop making a scene. The protagonist told the girl to go to class. He promised to pick her up. Sue asked her friend where he was going now. Nin turned slyly to the side. He said in an angry voice that he was going to go and kill someone. Shay looked angrily at the guy from the side and said that he was a very crazy fool. The angry protagonist remained silent. He didn't respond to the offender's words. The girl on the side reminded the guy that he had promised Auntie Ching that he would not fight with anyone. Nin explained to his partner in a dissatisfied voice that he remembered about it. The protagonist asked the guy if he really was from the Xu family. The student replied that their family was not someone to mess with. He demanded that Nin stay away from his girlfriend. The main character, standing near the car, demanded that the guy tell Xu Quanjia's relative that he would be waiting for him at 8 o'clock today. She asked the main character in a dissatisfied voice, did he really think that his older uncle would want to date him? A dark aura appeared around the protagonist. He decided to attack the guy with a powerful blow. After being attacked by his opponent, Shuri flew far to the side and fell to the ground. Nin stood next to the car, holding onto the door with his hand. The beaten guy lay on the ground, clutching his shoulder with his hand. The female students looked at him in fear. The main character jumped into his car and prepared to leave as quickly as possible. Nin returned to his home and greeted his mother. The woman was sitting in a wheelchair and greeted the boy. The woman turned around and looked at the real guy on his knees. She asked the protagonist to let him go already. Nin explained to his mother that Kangen wanted to kill them, and that's why this guy can't get off easy now. The protagonist told the woman in an angry voice that he would kill Ching Fenhe next. Nin looked sternly at his mother and asked if she would try to stop him. A black car was speeding down the street. A woman was knocking on the gate and screaming for it to be opened for her. The mother banged her hands on the gate. She shouted that she was ready to die, but her son needed to be protected. A little boy stood next to her. The son was very scared. He came up to his mother from behind and put his hand on top of hers. The driver in the car told his accomplice in an angry voice that they needed to leave. The fighter jumped out and shouted at the woman that they needed to stop begging people and that they needed to leave. The woman at the door was shouting at people to help her. She was still part of the Nin family. The man jumped out of the car and took the woman and child with him. He said they had to leave. The door suddenly opened and a wounded man fell out. The frightened guest called for the second uncle. The agitated driver from the car called out to Cannon in a frightened voice. A fighter emerged from the open gate, blade in hand. He silently looked at the body lying before him. The main character was sitting in a car. He drove up to a large gate with his parents. The security guard looked at the Ning family's car in surprise. He didn't understand who could have arrived. The driver shouted to open the door. A member of the Ning family had arrived. The guards opened the door wide. The car headed into the courtyard. Nin looked out the side window. He said that on a rainy night, the red doors of his grandfather's house remained tightly closed. The woman sat in the back seat next to her husband. She repeated Cannon's name in a displeased voice. The guest's car stopped near the exit. They were met by a group of people near the steps. The man approached the car and told the guests that they had arrived but were not getting out. The main character told his partner in an angry voice that the head of the house should open the door for him personally. People in the crowd became very wary. They recognized the guy's voice inside the car. The man smiled and told the guy in a frightened voice that he would open the door. The owner opened the car door. He saw a disgruntled man and a woman inside. The people in the courtyard looked at the guests with displeasure. They didn't understand who had come to visit them. The woman in the car looked at the man in the yard and called him her second brother. The host told the guest in a displeased voice that she had ceased to be part of their family a long time ago. The man told the guards in an angry voice to quickly throw the guests out. The owner heard a noise from behind. He said in a displeased voice that he already thought that Ning Kanhai had arrived. The protagonist asked the owners with displeasure why they were in such a hurry to drive them away. He decided that they felt guilty. The protagonist stood near the car. The guy asked the owners why they wanted to drive him away so quickly. He decided they felt guilty. The owner angrily told the guy that their family is one of the richest and most influential in the city. They don't feel guilty when dating someone. The man with the bag jumped out of the car. He didn't like the owner's words. The guest handed the guy a package. The host asked his partner with displeasure what he wanted to show them. Canlin advised him to read it himself first. The man grabbed his wife's stroller and told her in a sad voice that they were going inside now. The guy opened the package. He read the documents inside with great fear and surprise. A girl standing nearby asked tension in surprise. What did he see? The young man excitedly explained to his daughter-in-law that he was holding a contract with the Ning conglomerate. The owner asked discontentedly where the main character could have gotten their contract from. The guest turned around. He told the people that when they finished reading the documents, they could go inside. There they would sign the contract termination. Tanshan entered the room with documents in hand. He asked the guest if he knew how much their family had invested in this business. The guy with the papers in his hands angrily asked the guest, "Is he really suggesting that they break this contract?" Canlin said in a calm voice that he was the head of the Nin conglomerate. That should be enough. Tenshin told the man in a dissatisfied voice that the head of the conglomerate was Ning Kanhai. He would never give up his position. The angry guy decided to call Kanhai and ask him what was going on. Nin stood calmly and looked ahead. He waited for the phone call to end. The guy was very scared when he realized that he hadn't gotten through to his partner. He decided to call Nin Fugu back now. Tenshin clutched the phone in his hand with displeasure. He didn't understand why no one was answering him. The guy next to him advised the gentleman to call Ning Kong. The fighter was frightened and secretly happy when he heard his partner pick up the phone. The protagonist stood to the side with his parents, closely following the conversation. His partner asked Tenshin if the boy had come to see them. Tenshin excitedly asked Kang on the phone who he meant. Kangen, with great fear, warned the owner that the guy Ninbei, whom they wanted to kill 13 years ago, had come to him. The telephone partner advised the frightened owner not to provoke the guy if he didn't want to die. Tiansheng looked at the phone in his hand with fear. He couldn't understand what could have frightened such a powerful warrior. Ning Kang. Canlin demanded in a stern voice that the head of Qing sign the document quickly. Tanshin turned around. He looked at his companion with great surprise and attention. The girl in red reminded the woman that they were one family. She demanded that the wife convince her husband not to condemn their family to bankruptcy. The guest angrily told the girl that it was now too late to regret anything. Canlin told the host that when he got married, he and his wife used all the family's resources to make their company great. The man told the frightened people that he was now taking back what he had previously lent them. A man entered the house from the side. He told the frightened brother to sign the documents. People turned and looked at the front door. There stood a guy in a green suit and glasses. The man at the entrance greeted the third brother with a very joyful voice. The protagonist looked at the guest opposite him. He greeted him and called him by the name Ching Fenhei. The owner looked at the guest with displeasure and sternly asked what he meant. The guest explained to the surprised people that the Ning family had invested more than 10 billion in the new district and had suffered great losses. Fenhei said in an angry voice that the family is now under great pressure. Without them, they cannot survive. The guest held out the documents in his hand. He asked the man to give him everything he had bought. Canlin held the documents in his hands. He told his partner that everything that belonged to him had already been accounted for. Fenhei held the documents in his hands. He looked at them with great fear and displeasure. The guest threw the papers on the floor in displeasure. He shouted in a disgruntled voice that the Ning family were exploiters. Canlin replied to his partners that they had come today to punish them. The man to the side said in a disgruntled voice that they had invested more than 6 billion. The profit from 2 small projects was no more than 2 billion. The guy in glasses pointed to the side. He shouted at his brother to sign. The man asked Fenhei, could he have gone crazy too? Fenhei said in a thoughtful voice that the Liang family is willing to become a shareholder once all 3 projects are completed. This will be enough to repay the bank loan. Then the Ching family will be restored. After a short pause, the man said in a dissatisfied voice that he would sign everything. The owner sat down at the table and signed the document. His disgruntled relatives stood behind him. At this moment, the man's phone suddenly rang. He was surprised and was getting ready to pick up the receiver. Canlin looked at his phone and said that Xiao Shi had called him. Ning told his father to answer the call. The host was surprised that his guest could be acquainted with the richest man in the world. Xiao Shi? The billionaire was sitting at a large table. He asked the man with a smile if he was distracting him. Canlin asked the caller with excitement, what questions could he possibly have for him? Xiao happily informed the man that the board of directors had agreed to invest in the Ning family. The man was very surprised. He looked at his phone in amazement and couldn't believe his partner's words. Gio told his partner with a smile that they were willing to invest $10 billion in Ning's company at a 10% stake. He asked for an answer. The guests in the room were very surprised when they heard the billionaire's proposal to the man. The man asked in a trembling voice, is it really okay to invest 10 billion for 10% of the shares? The main character came up to the side and told his father with the phone that 10% would be a lot. Xiao jumped up near the table along with the other meeting participants. He loudly greeted the King of the North. The people in the room were very surprised. They couldn't understand who Xiao had just called the King of the North. The billionaire conciliatedly told the man that he was offering him 5%. The participant on the side added that they would agree to even 1%. The man on the phone agreed to the proposal with a smile. Xiao joyfully shouted to him that the deal was done. The protagonist looked joyfully at his father from the side. He realized that the man was happy. Xiao shouted to his colleagues at the table that they had made a deal. The participant joyfully shouted that they now had an official connection with the King of the North. The man told the guests with displeasure that they couldn't defeat the Qing family simply for money. He reminded them of the existence of martial arts masters. The protagonist turned around and told the hosts that Fenhei was one of the martial arts masters. Nin turned around. He told his father to take his mother, and they took a short walk down the street. The man stood next to his wife's stroller. He looked at the guy in surprise. The protagonist stood in the center of the room. Magical swirls began to appear around him. The protagonist stood in the center of the room. A bright glow appeared near his feet and spread in all directions. The people in the room could no longer stand on their feet. They began to fall en masse to their knees. The irritated man fell to his knees. He thought angrily to himself about the martial arts master. The main character angrily asked the people, did they really think he didn't understand all this? Tianxian understood why Kangoo had warned him that the guy should not be provoked. The protagonist turned around and looked away with displeasure. He was watching the owners closely. At this time, Fenhei quietly pulled the blade out of his hand. He decided to rush at the guy. The fighter suddenly jumped up and ran up behind the protagonist to attack him with his blade. Fenhei swung his sword sharply and prepared to attack the protagonist with a blow to the back. Nin stood calmly. He did not react in any way to the attack of his opponent from behind him. Fenhei realized with anger and displeasure that he had failed to pierce the main character with his blade. Nin turned around and asked the fighter, did he really kill his second uncle that way? Ning turned to face his opponent. He angrily told the frightened Fenhei that he had shamefully attacked Ning Kanan and killed him from behind. The protagonist extended his hand forward and a glow appeared near it. He shouted at his opponent that he was about to die. The guy attacked Fenhei with a magic skill and was able to pierce his body completely. The frightened Fenhei, weapon in hand, flew far back. He looked ahead in amazement. After a short pause, the warrior fell dead to the floor. There was a bloody stain on his body. The protagonist turned around and headed for the exit. The man, in a frightened voice, repeated to himself the words about the god of war from the northern garrison. The servant joyfully informed the man and woman that Su Qin had arrived. The man was leading his wife in a carriage. He greeted the guest. The Qin warrior joyfully informed the woman that he had brought a gift for her. The man told the boy that he shouldn't have carried the gift since he wasn't a stranger. Qin glanced at the woman in the wheelchair and said that he still wanted it that way. Qin looked at the man from the side in surprise. The woman asked the warrior, "Did he really come to see the main character?" The man pushed his wife aside in a stroller. She told the guys to talk for now. The protagonist sat near the table. He told the guest to sit down. Nin asked the warrior, "Does the Su family really have any problems?" The guest sat down on the chair. He said with excitement that their family is not as strong as before, but they will not rely on outsiders. The Ning family is now also in the same difficult situation. The protagonist took the glass in his hands. He thought that Qin was a strong warrior, unlike the rest of his family. The guest handed the protagonist a card. He offered him 300 million to break off his engagement with Su. The main character slammed his fist on the table menacingly. He sternly told the guy to leave. Qin jumped to his feet. He told the protagonist with displeasure that he didn't even know what the girl liked. Nin turned around. He asked his guest with displeasure why he had turned the engagement into a bargaining match. The protagonist turned around and asked the guest with displeasure why he had turned the engagement into a bargaining match. Qin replied to his partner that the marriage had been an arranged one from the start. A servant ran up from the side. He excitedly told the boy that someone was looking for him. Nin answered the servant that the guest could come in. A young girl entered the room. She greeted the King of the North. Qin was very surprised when he heard the guest call the main character the King of the North. The girl introduced herself and said that her name was Mu Shi. She was the president of the Asian branch of the PG. Mu Shi informed the protagonist that they were ready to transfer $10 billion to the Ning company. Tim was very surprised when he heard the words about the transfer of 10 billion. The protagonist pointed to the side with his hand. He told the servant to take the girl to her father to sign the contract. Nin explained to his partner that he didn't need money. If he needed it, many people would gladly give him anything. The main character told the guest in a dissatisfied voice that if he wanted to say something, Grandma Su could come to him. Qian fell silent. He looked at the guy with great surprise and displeasure. The protagonist sat at the table. He couldn't understand why the Su family wanted to pay so much money to break off the engagement. A servant ran into the room. He told the commander that he wanted to report information to him. Nin asked the fighter if they had found the thieves of his relative's ashes. The fighter told the protagonist in a sad voice that they had not found the kidnappers. The guest knelt down on the floor. He told the boy in a sad voice that they had found traces of the fourth Ning elder. The protagonist jumped up and slammed his hands on the table. He couldn't believe that the fourth uncle was alive. The fighter told the protagonist with great excitement that they had only found traces so far. The man at the table commanded the guest to start searching. The fighter bowed to the guy and said that he would do everything. The protagonist looked angrily ahead. He couldn't believe that the fourth uncle was still alive. The protagonist was racing along a country road in a car. He commanded the driver Xiao to drive faster. After this, the car with passengers stopped in a big traffic jam. There were other cars parked around. Xiao began to press his hand on the signal with displeasure. He did not understand what had happened in front of him. The truck driver told the guy that honking the horn would be useless. He got stuck in that spot for a couple of hours every day. The protagonist sat in the passenger seat. He told the driver that a helicopter needed to be sent. Xiao excitedly explained to the guy that the helicopter was on a mission nearby. Nin looked out the car window. He said that the people in the helicopter were supposed to pick him up. He would help them complete the task faster. Xiao turned around and said in a menacing voice that he would do everything for him. A black helicopter suddenly appeared above the road and began to descend toward the cars. People on the highway were very surprised. They couldn't understand where the helicopter came from. A soldier dropped a ladder from a helicopter. The main character approached it. People on the road watched in amazement as the guy grabbed the ladder and flew away on it in a helicopter. A combat helicopter flew over a green forest. The main character was on board. The aircraft landed on the ground. There were people around on the grass. Nin got out of the helicopter and asked in a dissatisfied voice, "What is the situation?" The soldiers on the ground in black uniforms could not understand who had just arrived to them. Su exited the helicopter. He sternly demanded that the warriors not evade the answer. The soldier greeted the commander. He explained that they had come here to check on reports of missing people in the area. They had been attacked by an animal. Zhu explained to the Kobayashi fighter that he was already at the primary level. An ordinary beast could not injure him. The warrior said in an excited voice that the beast was very ferocious. It moved at a speed of 10 meters per second. The commander told the soldiers to take care of the wounded man. Nin told his companion that someone was already watching them. The protagonist glanced sideways. He noticed someone appearing there. Nin stood with his companion. Together, they noticed someone slipping through the forest thicket. Kobayashi excitedly shouted to the fighters to look to the side carefully. The warriors looked around carefully. They couldn't figure out where the beast had gone. Xiao shouted that the predator must be somewhere nearby. The girl shouted in a disgruntled voice that all the fighters in the Dragon City were so useless. The guy grabbed his girlfriend by the hands and told her not to talk nonsense. The stranger looked at the fighters with displeasure and said that they could not cope with the beast. Zhao looked at the girl with displeasure. He asked the fighters who this was in front of him. The warrior told the commander that the girl's name was Liu Liner. She encountered a predatory beast on the mountain while collecting medicinal herbs. Xiaoling was seriously injured while rescuing her. The boy smiled at Commander Xiao and told him that his sister was a bit rude. He apologized for the trouble. Liu was displeased when she heard her brother's words. The main character stood and calmly looked away at the girl. A surprised Kobayashi stood next to him. Nin pointed his hand at the girl. He said that there was a herb in her basket that could ease the pain. Liu grabbed her bag with her hands. She said discontentedly that she had been looking for this herb for a very long time. The main character looked at the girl silently and displeasedly. Kobayashi stood behind him. After a short pause, Nin sternly demanded that the girl get out quickly. Liu asked her partner with displeasure. Who was he to tell her what to do? The protagonist told the girl that if she considered them useless, she could go herself. Liu told the fighters in a tearful voice that there might be a beast in front of her, and they had to protect her. Xiao told the girl in a stern voice that their task was to kill the beast, not to protect her. She must leave. Liu looked ahead with displeasure. Angry warriors stood next to her. The girl threatened the soldiers in an angry voice that their grandfather would punish them. She said in an angry voice that Mr. Liu had been practicing medicine for many years. It was a shame for him to have such a descendant. The guy told the girl in a dissatisfied voice that it was her fault they were kicked out. Liu responded with dissatisfaction that he should stop chatting. Xiao came up to the side and told the protagonist that he couldn't let anything happen to the girl. The protagonist turned around with displeasure. He noticed someone approaching in the forest. The boy and girl were scared. They saw a huge black predator running straight towards them. A forest beast with an angry look ran straight at the girl. She began to cry out for help in fear. The girl screamed in fear when she saw a huge predator above her. The forest predator pounced on its prey. Liu was unable to dodge it. The frightened Xiao rushed to the side to help the unfortunate girl and protect her. The predator pounced on its prey from above. At that moment, something flew past and pierced its head. The beast fell dead to the ground. A frightened girl sat next to it, unable to move. A frightened boy ran up from the side. He grabbed his sister by the arms to help her. Xiao turned around in fear and looked at the protagonist. Ning just stood there and held his hand outstretched in front of him. Kobayashi said in a frightened voice that the guy had just thrown down the first piece of paper he came across. The protagonist headed toward the helicopter. He told Xiao to go with him to Luo City. The rest were to return to Dragon City. Kobayashi asked his commander in fear, "Could it really be Lu Gui or Guo Baifei?" His partner answered the guy that it was neither of those fighters. The warrior excitedly explained to his friend that only one person had the right to wear clothes with gilded patterns. The fighter explained to his subordinate that only such a person could give orders to all 5 commanders. The protagonist entered the helicopter with his companion. The aircraft began to rise. Ning sat on a chair in the hall with his subordinate. They watched the monitors intently. Xiao told his partner that the king of the north, Ning Kanshan, was alive. The protagonist watched the video carefully. He saw a man on a bicycle. Nin jumped up in his chair with joy. He shouted that he saw the 4th uncle. A man with a bicycle was walking down the street. There were many passersby around him. A woman asked a passerby if he sold candied hawthorn berries. The man told his partner that he could use some money for his household. A passerby told the man with displeasure that he had not shown up for the job interview last time. The owner opened the doors of her shop to let the man in. She explained to Mrs. Zhao that Mr. Ning's health was poor. Zhao handed the woman a small envelope. She said it would help pay for their child's education. The woman, frightened, began to refuse the money. The man with the bicycle told the woman with displeasure that they hadn't even returned the money they borrowed last time. Zhao handed the people an envelope with money and told them not to worry about it. The mother demanded that her daughter thank the benefactor. The girl thanked her aunt. A group of armed criminals appeared on the street. One of the bandits angrily asked people if they had paid their water bills. The man behind the counter handed the money to the bandit Liang Yu and said that it was his payment. Liang turned around and angrily asked the man Ning if he was ready to pay him. Liang got angry. He ran up to the man from the side and with a powerful kick threw his bicycle to the ground. The bandit placed a small stick with berries on the man's head. He told him not to say anything about poverty. That wouldn't reduce the tax. A girl ran up from the side. She stretched out her hands forward and shouted at the bandit not to hurt her dad. Liang abruptly pushed the girl aside. He shouted at her to get lost. The mother called out to Guogo in a frightened voice. The woman hugged her daughter and told her not to cry. Guo said in a tearful voice that someone was bullying her father. The man looked angrily at the intruders. There was a very dark aura around him. The bandits happily saw an envelope on the ground. They decided that there was money inside. Liang pointed his hand forward. He angrily threatened the man that he would tear him apart because he wanted to hide the money. The man turned away and told his wife in a stern voice to take their daughter home. Liang came up to Ning from the side and asked in an angry voice, "Did he really want to fight?" Nin suddenly rushed forward towards the bandit and with all his strength twisted his arm far back. Liang felt a strong pain in his arm. He grabbed it. His frightened accomplices stood next to him. The man told the bandits in a very dissatisfied voice that he was a pathetic person who could not protect his loved ones on that distant day. Ning told the attackers in an angry voice that they would die for hurting Guo and his wife today. The attackers rushed forward to attack the man. They shouted that he was going to die. Nin scattered the bandits around him with very powerful and strong blows from his hands. The man stood and watched attentively as the frightened bandits lay on the ground next to him. Liang ran to the side in fear. He shouted to the man that they wouldn't let him get away with this. Nin was seriously injured after a fight with bandits. He developed a blood cough. The daughter and the woman ran up to the man to help him. A passerby grabbed Nin to help him stand on his feet. Nin was lying on the ground. People were running around him and trying to help him. A passerby shouted that they needed to call an ambulance. At this moment, two warriors in black clothes appeared on the street. Passersby looked at them in surprise. Nin saw strangers on the street. He told the woman to take her daughter and run away. Zhang approached the man. She explained to him that if bad people came to them, they should call the police. The man said in a very angry voice that in front of them were not some small-time bandits, but real murderers. Nin bowed to the unfamiliar fighters on the street and said that he was ready to fight them now. The warrior looked sternly at the man and asked if his name was Ningkanshan. The man bowed to the mercenaries and said that he was the very man they should kill. The fighters Wang Long and Chen Hu bowed unanimously to the man. They called him the fourth elder. Nin was very surprised. He couldn't understand what the mercenaries had just told him. The fighter told the man that the commander had ordered him to find the fourth Nin elder. Nin began to fall unconscious. A fighter caught him and held him. The warrior shouted to the side that the best doctors in the city needed to be called immediately. An ambulance stopped near the house. A group of doctors got out and headed to the berth. The man was lying on the bed. Doctors were standing next to him. They were examining the patient. The doctor in the white coat said that the man's pulmonary arteries were damaged, and they could do nothing to help him. The fighter angrily told the medics that he would finish them off now. The warrior told Chen Hu not to say that again. The doctor said in an angry voice that if someone threatened him, it would not make the dying man feel any better. The old man grabbed his beard. He told the doctors in a thoughtful voice that they were proclaiming death wherever they went. After a short pause, the old man told his grandson to give him the silver needles. The main character entered the room with Xiao. He waved his hand to the people inside. The fighter told the protagonist that the master of acupuncture, Dr. Liu, was currently in the room. Dr. Liu approached the man who was sitting on the bed. The patient had a large scar on his chest. The old man began moving his hands up and down. He closed his eyes. After that, he put his hand to the patient's head. Suddenly, the man's eyes lit up brightly. Energy began to flow through his body. The patient on the bed thanked the doctor for saving him. Liu explained to the patient that he couldn't do anything about his old wounds. He had merely prolonged his life a little. The doctor promised the man that he could live 3 days at most. The fighter jumped out of bed and greeted the protagonist. The old man turned in surprise at Nin in the doorway. The man looked at the main character in surprise. He recognized him and wanted to say his name. The main character smiled at his fourth uncle and said that it was him. Nin called the main character's name in a broken and frightened voice. He extended his hand to him. The man rushed forward towards the boy. After that, they hugged each other joyfully. The man joyfully grabbed the boy's arms from the side. Nin excitedly explained to his uncle that his wound needed to be treated now. Liu, standing to the side, explained to the boy with displeasure that he had only been able to prolong the patient's life by 3 days with the needles. That was the maximum time. The protagonist turned away with displeasure and said that he had already looked at the legendary doctor's skills. The protagonist reached out and touched the scar on the man's body. He said in a confident voice that he would now show him how to treat it properly. Nin turned his hand to the side and with its help grabbed the needles that were lying in the surprised guy's hands. Nin held magic needles in his hands. He said that even the king of the underworld could not take away someone close to him. Liu said with surprise that the guy controls the needles with chi energy. The doctor, surprised, said from the side that a guy with such skills could be one of the best in the country. Gradually, magical blue clouds with needles began to appear near the man's body. He looked at them with fear. The patient felt a recovery in his body. The needles entered his body. Liu was surprised by the patient's recovery. He asked the protagonist with great surprise who he was. The boy told his relative to leave the needles in his body for another 7 days. Then they could be removed. The protagonist turned around and headed for the exit, followed by a surprised Zhao. Liu pointed with a trembling hand after the guy. He said that he was the king of the north with a cloak with a gold pattern. The protagonist left the building. He said that the fourth uncle was fine and just needed a little rest. A woman and her daughter were waiting for him outside. Ning sat down next to the girl Guo and asked her with interest if she knew who he was. The woman looked at her surprised daughter and told her to say hello to her older brother Ning. The girl told the boy in a frightened voice that her father had said that he had gone far, far away, as if he had died. The main character hugged the girl and asked with concern what happened to her face. Guo told the guy in a whiny voice that a bad bald uncle hit her. He even hit her father. The protagonist angrily demanded that his subordinate find the bandit and kill him. Xiao seriously replied to the commander that he would do everything. A group of bandits appeared on the street. They viciously threatened the protagonist that they would break his arms. Lian had a bandaged hand. He pointed his finger at the woman and said that she was with the main character. The main character swung his hand sharply and threw his cloak aside. Nin swung his sword with all his might. He chopped off the bandit's left arm with a powerful blow. The main character angrily asked the uninvited guest who was ready to attack him next. One of the bandits said in a frightened voice that he came from the Axe Gang. Xiao angrily ran up to the bandit and irritably shouted that no one cared where he came from. The protagonist hugged the girl and pressed her to himself. He turned around and called his subordinate. Nin turned around and sternly ordered the fighter to cripple all the bandits. Xiu looked at his commander and shouted that he would do everything. Ning stood next to the woman and the girl. One of the fighters helped the man approach the car. There were guards along the entire route. One of the neighbors said with a smile that the man Ning had hidden here from enemies. But now all the troubles were over, Zhang said, with a smile that she had no idea that the old man Ning's family was so complicated. The young man handed the woman a small package. He said that this was the money the fourth elder had borrowed from them. Zhang extended her hands forward and, with a frightened expression, told the fighter that he shouldn't give her anything. The warrior held out a large white box and opened it. The soldier extended his hand. He said it was a gift from their commander as a token of gratitude. Zhang picked up the suitcase. The man next to her said joyfully that they had taken care of Ningxi's family for so long and it had all been worth it. The protagonist and his companions were riding in a car. Guo still couldn't believe that Ningbei's brother was sitting in front of her. The man excitedly told the protagonist that he survived because he was born with his heart displaced to the right. The man placed his hand on his wife's lap. He said with a smile that she had secretly saved him and that she had not contacted her family since then. The partner smiled discontentedly at her husband and said that there was no need to raise this topic. The protagonist told his relative with excitement that he should use his real name. He was his idol as a child. The man smiled at the guy and said that it all happened so long ago and he no longer wanted to remember anything. The man said in a proud voice that when they returned home, he would drop the name Ningxi and become Ning Kanshan again. Su was standing near the gate of her mansion. A car drove up to her and stopped near the sidewalk. The girl told the protagonist with displeasure that she had been waiting for him for an hour and a half. He never picked her up. Nin got out of the car. He told the girl with a smile that he had completely forgotten about her. A woman with purple hair got out of the car. She asked the girl if she remembered her. Su shouted in a joyful and cheerful voice that her aunt was standing in front of her. Canlin ran out of the house. He greeted his fourth brother with a very joyful voice. Relatives joyfully hugged each other near the building's gate. The main character stood to the side. Su grabbed the woman's hand. She said with a smile that they urgently needed to see their grandmother. The guest joyfully ran inside the building. She called out to her mother in an excited voice. The old woman extended her hand to her. The grandmother hugged the woman. She asked her with tears in her eyes why she hadn't contacted them for so long. The protagonist stood to the side with the girl. They both watched the woman's meeting with her grandmother very closely. A guy on the street told his girlfriend that he could fulfill any of her wishes to make up for the inconvenience. Su told the guy that there was no need for him to apologize now. Su smiled slyly at the guy and said that she had a meaningless wish. The main character answered the girl with a smile that she could simply tell him about her desire. Su closed her eyes and folded her hands in prayer. She really wanted her grandmother and aunt to live peacefully in the future and not know any worries. The main character promised the girl that as long as he was here, everything would be fine with his relatives. The girl closed her eyes. She said with a smile that she wanted her older brother to be able to breathe a sigh of relief. For that to happen, everything needed to go very smoothly with the financing of the family business. Nin excitedly asked his girlfriend who was financing their conglomerate. Su told the boy that her older brother said business was going very hard due to the harsh conditions. Ning explained to the girl that her brother should drop everything and withdraw the money. He could team up with the Ning family and invest together in new districts of Dragon City. Su closed her eyes. She told the guy in a dissatisfied voice that everything would not be as simple as he thought. The girl folded her hands in prayer. She wanted to tell her friend about her third wish. The girl thought to herself that she didn't want her engagement with the guy to be broken off now. Su shouted in a loud voice that she wanted someone to go to university and complete a 4-year curriculum. The girl opened one eye. She saw something sparkle in the air around her. Nin extended his hand forward. He told his girlfriend judiciously that a diploma from the Balin Military Academy was worth more than a regular university degree. Su asked the guy with concern how he would look for a job if companies didn't know about his academy. The guy chuckled slyly to himself. Su smiled slyly and told her friend that he probably wouldn't have to refer to the educational institution. The protagonist stroked his girlfriend's head. He reminded her that he would definitely fulfill her wish. Nin turned around and, as a parting word, promised the girl that he would graduate from a regular university. Several cars pulled up to the estate's doors. Someone shouted that the Shear family had arrived for a visit. Canlin greeted the guest. He apologized for not coming out to him right away. The man told his master in an angry voice that he didn't care who won or lost their internal struggle. A battered boy stood next to him. A man near the entrance told the people inside in an angry voice that their son was a criminal. The grandmother asked the man how the main character had offended their family. She greeted the old woman. The father commanded his son to go to his grandmother himself. She must see how the protagonist had wounded him. The man in the house told the guest with a smile that his son's wounds weren't very serious. Shur was unhappy that his partner didn't think the boy's wounds were serious. The guest looked closely and was surprised to realize that he saw the fourth elder of Ning in front of him. Nin smiled at the guest and greeted him. He said that he hoped that everything was well with him. She thought to himself that something strange had been going on in the Ning family lately. He thought that the man in front of him had died a long time ago. The guest told the host that he demanded an explanation from them for seriously injuring his son. Nin asked his partner in a dissatisfied voice, "What kind of explanation does the Shu family want?" She sat down on a chair near the table. He demanded that the protagonist kneel before him and say that he was wrong. A girl entered the room with the main character. She shouted in a frightened voice that Zhenxiang was the first to insult Ningbei. The old woman demanded in a displeased voice that the girl not interfere in the elder's conversation. The grandmother told the main character in a stern voice that he should apologize now. She sternly demanded that the boy beg for forgiveness on his knees. He threatened Ning's family with consequences. The boy told the old woman in a dissatisfied voice that she was very partial to the Shi family. The guest jumped to his feet in displeasure. The old woman explained to the protagonist that the Shi family's grandfather was her brother. So respect must be shown. Nin asked the man, does he really want him to apologize to him on his knees? Shi answered the guy in an angry voice that everything was correct. The protagonist looked angrily at the man and said that the Shar family would not be able to accept his worship. The man looked angrily at the guy. He promised him that they were ready for any consequences. The protagonist waved his hand to the side. The grandmother angrily shouted at the boy not to kneel. An old man ran into the room. He extended his hand forward and shouted at the guy not to kneel. Shi looked at the old man with displeasure. He sternly asked him what he was doing here. The grandfather waved his hand in displeasure and hit the man in the face. He demanded that he kneel. Shi put his hand to his face in fear. He called out to his father in a displeased voice. The old man shouted in an angry voice at the people around him to all kneel down. Shi fell to his knees, and behind him stood a very frightened and surprised guy. The old man bowed before the boy. He shouted, "The Shi family from Dragon City welcomes Commander Ning." The grandmother asked the third brother in fear what he was doing. She promised to protect his entire family. Shi and his son were very surprised that the old man called the main character a commander. Nin told the man in a cunning voice that he had told him earlier that he would not be able to accept his worship. The main character stood in the center of the room. He angrily told the old man with the man on his knees to get out of his sight. The grandfather bowed low to the boy and thanked him for his mercy. The old man and his relatives headed towards the exit to leave as quickly as possible. The grandmother told her daughter that she also needed to leave. The woman told the old woman that she wanted to see her off. The father asked the main character with displeasure why he got involved with the Shar family in the first place. The main character explained to the man that he had a fight with a guy named Zhengxian over a girl near the university. The man reminded the boy with excitement that he had spent 13 years on the northern border. He had a lot to learn. Nin replied to his father that he was defending the country from invaders. There was no talk of awards or honors. The protagonist sat outside in a meditative pose. He closed his eyes and immersed himself in meditation. Sue came up from the side. In a displeased voice, she demanded that the guy quickly leave. The main character jumped to his feet abruptly. Sue asked the guy if he remembered his promise last night. Nin explained to his girlfriend that he remembered her wish and would definitely keep his word. The protagonist stood near the exit to the estate. He told father that he would be leaving for a short while. The man replied to the boy that he knew everything. The father told his son that the girl would go to university with him for a few days. The main character asked the man with displeasure, "Was this really Mom's idea?" Sue answered her friend in a sly voice that perhaps all of this was true. The main character smiled very slyly at the girl. He didn't say anything to her. Nin walked with his girlfriend to the entrance of the university. There were other students around them. Sue told her companion with a smile that they first needed to visit the director. The receptionist told guests that the director was not available. They needed to make an appointment to meet him. The girl looked at her phone. She said in a dissatisfied voice that she would call the director now. Nin turned around and looked at his girlfriend very slyly. He glanced at her phone. Sue turned to the guy and asked what he was looking at. Nin told his girlfriend that she could call now. The girl's partner didn't answer. She said in a displeased voice that the silly old man must have gotten drunk again. The main character walked up to the wall and looked closely at the portrait on it. The girl turned to look at him in surprise. Nin saw a portrait of a man on the wall. The girl explained to her friend that it was a portrait of the director. The main character extended his hand to the girl and said that he wanted to call. Sue asked the guy in surprise, "Does he really know Director's son?" The protagonist called a secret line. His partner asked the guy where he got this number. After a short pause, Nin introduced himself to his partner over the phone. Sue watched him from the side with surprise. The partner greeted the King of the North with great surprise on the phone. The protagonist stood next to his girlfriend on the street. He reminded the president on the phone that there was a teacher named Song Zhen at the Liang Military Academy. The president excitedly told the boy that the teacher had been fired. There had been complaints about him being a bad lecturer. The main character sternly demanded that his partner find a teacher as soon as possible and call him back. Sue in the hallway asked a friend if he really studied with Professors Kong Lin and Xu Yuan. The guy with the phone in his hand answered his partner that these teachers were very good. She asked the boy with great excitement, "Does he understand how incredible these teachers are?" Sue told her friend on the go that one teacher was the dean of a medical college. The other was a nuclear physicist. The main character explained to the girl in a dissatisfied voice that she still didn't understand what the Balian Military Academy was. The guy's phone rang. He looked at the device. She was watching him from the side, surprised. The teacher nervously told the protagonist on the phone that he was in a meeting and couldn't answer right away. He wanted to ask the guy something. The protagonist told teacher Sunu on the phone that he could come out and meet him near the principal's office. Sun jumped up in surprise and slammed his hand on the chair. He asked the guy with excitement, "Did he really want to enroll?" The teacher abruptly rushed to the office door and prepared to go out into the hallway. The students at the table turned to look at him in surprise. The teacher, holding documents in his hands, walked very quickly down the corridor. The main character and his girlfriend looked at him in surprise. Sun opened the door to the office. He smiled and invited the protagonist and his girlfriend to come in. Sue pointed her hand at her friend. She explained to the teacher that she had told him about him earlier. Sun looked at the guy with a smile. He slyly said that they had met 5 years ago. The protagonist told the teacher his name in an official voice. He was born in the city of the dragon. The man at the table told the boy that he had never said he was from the Dragon City before when he worked at the military academy. In a dry, sly voice, she asked the teacher to help the guy with the documents. The teacher told the protagonist in an official voice that teaching was impossible for him. Sue anxiously asked the man what was wrong. The teacher worriedly told the protagonist that studying there would be a waste of time for him. He wanted to hire the guy as an honorary dean. Nin told the teacher in a sly voice that he could not promise him that he would come every day. Sun opened the cabinet and took out a large box. He told the protagonist that he wanted to give it to him as a gift as his salary. The man opened the box. Inside, there was a large blue stone lying on a pillow. Sue joyfully shouted that it was a diamond in front of her. The main character answered his girlfriend in a calm voice that she saw a spiritual stone in front of her. Nin picked up the stone. He told the girl that such spiritual stones are almost never found anymore. Spiritual herbs have degenerated. Sun, with great excitement, offered the boy 1 stone a month for his work. The main character slyly asked the man, "Does he really have that many spiritual stones?" The teacher excitedly promised the boy that he would be able to find more stones. The protagonist extended his hand forward. He told the teacher that he was ready to work for him for 3 stones a month. Sun stood near the table. He looked happily at the guy and shouted in a cheerful voice that they had come to an agreement. The girl looked after the teacher in surprise. She didn't understand why he left. Ning explained to her friend that Sun had gone to look for spiritual stones for him. A group of teachers was walking down the corridor. A Sunni teacher was walking in front of them. The teachers were displeased when they looked at the main character. They decided that he was too young to give lectures. The teacher asked his colleague whether he remembered the story about anti-gravity that Mr. Yang published in the academic journal. Lee adjusted his glasses. He said excitedly that he remembered this article. He asked, "What does the guy have to do with it?" The teacher told his colleagues in a joyful voice that the main character had written the article. He asked his colleague in a surprised voice, "Why would Mr. Yan steal other people's achievements?" Nin explained to the man in a dissatisfied voice that all this was not considered theft if he himself allowed it. He asked the guy in a dissatisfied voice what the purpose of that article was then. The main character spoke in a loud voice to the surprised teachers about the industrialization of anti-gravity. The teachers were very surprised when they heard such words from the boy. A pleased Sun stood next to them. The boy turned away. He told the teachers that he didn't have much time to waste on empty chatter. The teacher took out a blue stone. He showed it to the main character with excitement. Nin looked at the spiritual stone in the man's hands with great attention. The teachers began to take out their artifacts and show them to the guy. Nin angrily asked the teachers, "Do they all really have spiritual stones?" Lai excitedly told his partners that 10 years ago, Chen was exploring Mount Beyond. He found a stone there. At first, everyone mistook it for a diamond. After examining it, they realized it was something else. Li was holding a stone in his hands. He told the guy that they had just brought a piece from a large stone. Teachers started entering the room. They took out their artifacts and showed them to the boy. Nin very sternly asked the men, where exactly did they find the stone? Lai excitedly explained to the protagonist that only Chen knew about the location of the stone. Nin asked the men, where could he meet Professor Chen now? Sun explained to the boy with excitement that this teacher had already died a long time ago. The protagonist looked ahead with displeasure. He realized that no one knew the stone's location anymore. Sun told his colleagues that he would personally monitor how professors would evaluate Mr. Ning as dean. Li excitedly explained to the teacher that, thanks to just one article about anti-gravity, the main character could be considered an academician. The man told the boy with excitement that deans usually guide students and manage large scientific projects. Li excitedly told the boy that he should join them. They were primarily focused on the industrialization of anti-gravity. The protagonist held a stone in his hands. He told the men that he wanted to know more about it. The man excitedly told the boy that Chen and Wang had found the stone in the mountains, but they knew nothing else about them. The main character asked his partner how long the teachers had been in the mountains. Sun explained to the boy that the teachers had been in the mountains for about 10 days. They hadn't taken much food with them because they weren't planning on staying for long. Nin, holding a stone in his hands, calculated and realized that the search area could be limited to 100 miles. The guy thought to himself with excitement that the vein of spiritual stones was located somewhere within this radius. The girl was walking down the stairs behind the protagonist. She asked him anxiously where he was going next. Nin turned around and told his girlfriend that he was going home with the stones. With their help, he decided to get his mother back on her feet. The guy was heading towards the university exit gate. The girl watched him with excitement. Sue said to herself in a dissatisfied voice that it was a bad idea to force the guy to go to university. The protagonist was walking down the street. He saw a huge crowd of passers-by standing there. A man's body lay near an ambulance on Earth. A nearby disgruntled driver demanded compensation for his damaged car. The guy shouted at the man in a displeased voice that he got behind the wheel drunk, and now he's attacking others. The enraged stranger hit the guy in the face with all his might. He introduced himself as Du Hao. People on the street were very surprised when they realized that in front of them was a representative of the Du family. Someone shouted that this man must not be provoked. The girl scooped up the old man's body. She shouted for someone to help them. Her brother had just returned from the northern border and was eager to see his grandfather. The stranger, with a trembling voice, asked the unconscious grandfather to hold on. He really wanted to see his grandson. The main character emerged from the crowd. He silently walked towards the girl opposite him. Nin approached the stranger from the side. He sternly demanded that he let the guy go. Du Hao got angry. He asked the guy in a displeased voice how he dared to threaten him. Nin calmly and silently stepped aside. Du looked after the guy with displeasure. The man pulled out a huge blade and ran behind to strike the main character. Ning suddenly thrust his hand to the side. With a powerful blow, he cut off the hand of Du Hao, who had run up. The man was very scared. He shouted in a loud voice that the guy had hurt his hand. The main character approached and saw how doctors were holding the body of their colleague on a stretcher. Nin put his hands on the victim's pulse and said that this patient could no longer be saved. The protagonist approached. He asked the girl excitedly, "Did her brother really serve on the northern border?" A stranger with tears in her eyes asked the guy to help her grandfather. The boy reached out to his grandfather's face. He told the girl that he could cure his illness. The stranger sadly told the protagonist that 6 months ago, the doctors had said that it was a miracle for the old man that he was still alive at all. A guy in a white medical coat ran up to the side. He asked with concern how Mr. Chow was feeling. The stranger turned around and greeted Uncle Zhenya with surprise. Jen excitedly shouted to the girl Yizhen that everything was going well and she shouldn't cry. He explained that they needed to take Mr. Chow to the hospital. The protagonist extended his hand forward and stopped the stranger. He explained that the patient was currently in critical condition. He could not be transferred. Jen looked at the guy with displeasure. He angrily asked, "Who is he?" Nin extended his hand to the medic and told him to give him his silver needles. A surprised Jung unrolled the cloth with needles. He was surprised that the protagonist even knew he had them. Nin extended his hand to the side and a bright glow appeared near it. Magic needles flew above it. The protagonist extended his hand to the side. He threw a bunch of needles into the body of the bedridden patient. Jung looked at the guy in surprise. He shouted in an excited voice that Ning was controlling the needles with key energy. The protagonist took his magic stone out of his pocket. He held it out to the patient's body. Blue energy began to descend from above onto the old man's body. Chow came to his senses and opened his eyes in surprise. He silently looked ahead. Nin extended his hand to the patient. He said that he had extended his life by another year. If he took good care of his health, he could live another 3 years. The old man excitedly extended his hand to the protagonist and asked him to wait. A ghost ran up from the side. He demanded in an angry voice that the guy tell him his name so that he could take revenge later. Nin sharply waved his palm to the side and directed it forward at the running man. Du fell to the ground unconscious after being attacked by the main character. A group of passers-by stood to the side and were very surprised. They looked at the man in amazement. Chow stood next to the girl. He told the protagonist with a smile that he would help him sort everything out. The old man handed the protagonist a business card. He told the boy that if he had any problems in the Dragon City, he would help him fix them. Izin smiled at the guy and happily thanked him for his help. The main character smiled and asked his partner, "What is her brother's name?" Yizhen happily and smilingly explained to her partner that her brother's name was Chaodong. The protagonist said thoughtfully that Chaodong was an eastern wolf. The girl was surprised that her partner knew her brother. Nin told the girl that her brother had accomplished many outstanding military achievements. The old man and the girl exchanged glances. Izin turned around and with great excitement asked the main character what his name was. The protagonist stated his name and began to walk away. He told the old man and the girl that they could find him at the Nin family's house. Chow and her granddaughter stood and joyfully watched the guy leave. The boy was able to heal his mother and get her back on her feet. The woman joyfully shouted that she could finally walk. Nin glanced happily to the side. He thought that for such a thing, it wasn't a pity to give up 7 spiritual stones. A girl entered the room and congratulated the owner on her recovery. The woman greeted Musi. Musi told the protagonist with admiration that $10 billion were transferred to the accounts of the Ning conglomerate. The protagonist told his partner that she should go to her father in the Ning conglomerate and start a geological exploration organization. They needed to study Mount Beyond. Musi headed for the exit. The mother turned around in surprise and asked the boy why he decided to take up geological exploration. Nin looked ahead happily. He told the woman in a confident voice that he wanted to find something specific. The girl opened the door to the room wide. She shouted to the guy at the table to get dressed and follow her. Ning turned around and asked his girlfriend, "Are they really going to Tang Yuxing's birthday party?" Su approached the guy from the side and told him in a displeased voice to get ready. She stood next to the protagonist. She demanded in a displeased voice that he join her. Nin looked at his partner with displeasure. He told her that he didn't like such noisy gatherings. The main character's mother called into the room with a loud and capricious voice. The woman came in and told the main character that if he didn't go with his girlfriend, she wouldn't be able to explain it to her friends. Nin thought to himself with disappointment and discontent that life had been much easier for him in the border garrison. The guy approached Link, who was hanging on the wall. He touched it with his hand and looked at it carefully. Sue reminded the guy with surprise that they were going to a birthday party. She asked, "Why does he need a sword?" The protagonist held the blade carefully in his hands. He looked at it with interest and hung it back on the wall. The guy extended his hand to the side. He told the surprised maid that he didn't need a suit. He decided to dress more simply. The car was racing down the street at full speed. The main character was sitting inside with his girlfriend. Sue sat next to her companion. She thought with displeasure that the guy was very stubborn. An expensive car pulled up to the entrance of the Xianyang Entertainment Center. The protagonist and his companion entered the entertainment center. There were a lot of young people relaxing there. The girl jumped up near the table and waved happily. She called her friend over. A guy was sitting next to her at the table. Sue looked at her friends in surprise. She told them with displeasure that they were already drinking and hadn't even waited for her. The guests at the table looked closely at the main character next to his girlfriend. Someone said that Nin was the girl's fiancé. The two guests laughed joyfully and merrily. They were amused when they called the main character the groom of Sue. Sue looked angrily at the guests and discontentedly demanded that they not laugh. A guy named Tang Zhaoyun greeted the protagonist and invited the others to join him for a drink. The girl on the side shouted angrily at the guy that he was her younger brother. Sue slyly told the main character that her Ona Yusin was born 15 minutes before Tang. The protagonist extended his hand to refuse the alcohol. He said that he was forbidden to drink. Tan held 2 glasses in his hands. He told his partner in a sly voice that it made no difference what exactly he drank. The guests began to sternly demand that the protagonist drink to Yusin's birthday. Tan turned around. He demanded in an angry voice that his friends not start any conflicts. Sue grabbed her sides. She told the guests in an angry voice that she would drink instead of her friend. The protagonist grabbed his girlfriend's hand. Sue, smiling, promised the guy that she was ready to drink to Yuxin's birthday today. The 2 guests laughed maliciously. They were unhappy that she wanted to drink instead of the main character. The guy said in a dissatisfied voice that Nin was just a dog that was thrown out after the death of the family. Tan slammed his glass on the table in anger. He yelled at Shi not to make trouble on his sister's birthday. The girl at the side table with drinks told her guest in a displeased voice not to be a bastard. The protagonist snatched the glass from his girlfriend's hands. The girl anxiously asked him what he was doing. Nin looked slyly at his girlfriend and cheerfully said that she would not drink instead of him. The protagonist drained the glass to the bottom. She anxiously reminded the guy that he was forbidden to drink. Nin looked to the side and sensibly told the girl that she would have to break either the prohibition or the promise. Sue was very happy when she heard such words from the guy. She looked at him with admiration. Tan cheerfully offered the protagonist another drink. Nin agreed. Yusin dragged her friend to the dance. She said that guys can still drink. A guy came up from the side. He happily told the guests that they were all drinking, but he wasn't invited. Tan admiringly told Yue's guest that he had previously said he wouldn't come. Yue cheerfully replied that he couldn't miss Yuxin's birthday. Tang sat down on a chair near the table with drinks. He introduced Yue Fen to the main character. The guest smiled and raised his glass. He shouted to the people that they would now drink to their acquaintance. The protagonist looked at the guy carefully. He said he had a lot of internal damage and needed to limit his drinking. Yu looked at his partner in surprise and said that he had medical skills. Tan anxiously asked his friend how he was feeling now. Yue told his partner the story of how he joined a special operations squad and had to fight a demon to prepare for real combat. The guy looked away sadly. He told in a mournful voice that he couldn't even hold out against his opponent for 10 hits. Tan asked his friend with concern, did his opponent really have the rank of a warrior? Nin explained to his friend that if the demon hadn't been a warrior, the guy wouldn't have gotten rid of him so easily. Yue asked his partner with great excitement, does that guy also know martial arts? Ning smiled at the guy and replied that one could say so. Yu looked at his partner with interest and asked, can he determine his fighting strength at first glance? The protagonist glanced sideways. He noticed another guest appear on the dance floor. A strange guy approached the girls from the side. He slyly invited them to dance with him. Sue smiled at the stranger and slyly told him that they did not agree to his proposal. The guests told the girls with a smile that if they didn't want to dance with him, they could at least have a drink with him. Yusin happily told the guy that she agreed to have a drink with him. An excited Sue ran up to her from the side. The guy extended his hand with a drink for the girl. He invited her to drink with him now. Sue looked at the drink in the stranger's hand with displeasure. She extended her hand towards him. The main character suddenly ran up from the side. He snatched the glass from his surprised girlfriend's hand. Yusin demanded in a capricious voice that the guy return her drink. Sue angrily asked her friend, what is he doing? Tan jumped to his feet. He approached the main character and sternly asked what was wrong with him. The main character handed the glass to his friend and said that he could see for himself. Nin swung his arm with all his might. He knocked the stranger aside with a very powerful blow. Tan looked at the glass of drink in amazement. He noticed that it contained drugs. An angry Yue came up from the side. He told the stranger in a dissatisfied voice that he was tired of living. A group of security guards ran into the room. They shouted at the guests to disperse. Tan grabbed the stranger with his hand. He shouted to the guard to call Du Yuan here immediately. The worker asked the guests who they were. The guest shouted in an angry voice to those around him that his name was Tang Qinyun from the Tang family. The guards were very surprised when they realized that such an important guest was standing in front of him. A man entered the room. he asked the guest with a smile. What could have made him angry here? Tan held out a glass of drink in front of him. He shouted to the man that his sister had just been drugged. A worker on the side called out to the president in fear. The man explained with concern that he was fine. The president pointed sternly to the side. He demanded that the guards drag the guy outside and break his arms. The attacker frightenedly defended himself to the man. The man asked the young master of the Tan with great excitement whether he would be satisfied with such a resolution of the situation. Yusin told the owner in a disgruntled voice that she wanted a separate room for karaoke. The president happily told the client that everything would be arranged for her right now. The protagonist turned around and looked suspiciously at the bowing man. The director angrily told the employee to keep an eye on the main character. He accused the guy of injuring Hauer. The woman asked the director why they didn't grab the guest right away. The man explained to the woman with displeasure that there were a lot of people from great families around them. They needed to do everything calmly later. The protagonist, accompanied by his guests, walked along the corridor. A servant pointed with his hand towards the room. Tan turned to the side. He carefully asked the protagonist what was going on. Nin told his companions in a stern voice that someone was following them now. The guard got scared. He abruptly rushed to the side and hid around the corner. Tan was sitting on the couch indoors. He was unhappy that someone dared to follow him. Nin explained to his friend that he was not the target of the surveillance. Yue asked the protagonist, how does he know that the person who wounded him is not worthy of the rank of warrior? Ning instructively explained to his partner that there are very specific characteristics inherent to those who have reached the rank of warrior. Such people understand how to infuse energy from the dantian into their strikes. Yue excitedly told the protagonist that if he had missed such a blow, he would still be lying in a hospital bed. Yusin grabbed the microphone on stage. She happily invited her companions to sing. The guests cheerfully suggested that the protagonist sing on stage. This was supposed to please the young lady from the Tang family. The guest said in an angry voice that the outcast of the Ning family considered himself a big shot. The guy next to him said in a dissatisfied voice that an abandoned son was worse than a dog. An angry Thane ran up from the side. He kicked one of the guys with a powerful swing. Tan told the guys in an angry voice that if they didn't want to drink with them, then they should get lost. The guest covered himself with his hand in fear. He asked his friend with displeasure, does he really want to quarrel with him over some scum? The guy told his companion in an angry voice that if he quarreled with him, he would not lose anything. The fighter turned around and looked angrily at the protagonist. He angrily threatened him. The guy looked angrily at the main character and said that he was also an outcast and worse than a dog. The main character got angry. He ran up to the guest and grabbed him by the neck with hatred. The people around were surprised. They realized that Nin had the combat rank of a warrior. Yue told the guy Shi Zhenyan in an angry voice that he knew nothing about life. Su stood to the side and was very scared. She thought that the main character could kill Shar now. The main character stretched his hand forward. He slowly strangled Shai with it. A frightened girl stood behind him. Su, frightened, shouted at the protagonist to let the guy go. Otherwise, Shar could die. Yue came up from the side. He told Ning to teach the attacker a lesson, but he couldn't kill him. A guest from the side threatened the main character that if he killed an ordinary person, the Special Operations Department of the Dragon Guard would deal with him. Nin turned to the side. He asked in a displeased voice why he should be afraid of the Special Operations Department. Two guys were running down the corridor. One of them shouted in a frightened voice that the warrior was killing people. Tan and his friend ran out into the corridor. They saw a fighter with a sword coming towards them. Tan looked ahead in fear and shouted that there really was someone walking in front of them. Yu told his friend with displeasure that he wanted to take on the Special Forces soldier. Tang had to calm the protagonist down. Yu had jumped out into the corridor in front of the fighter. He asked the warrior to make an exception. The fighter with a blade in his hand sternly threatened the guy that if he interfered with him, he would die on the spot. Yue was frightened. After a short pause, he ran after the warrior and shouted as he ran that he was ready. The unfamiliar fighter swung his arm sharply and hit the guy in the stomach with his knee with all his might. Tan looked angrily at the fighter and shouted that he dared to hit his third brother. The guy got angry. He ran up to the fighter from the side to attack him. The warrior grabbed his blade. The Tan jumped high into the air and tried to kick his opponent in midair. The fighter fought him off with his sword. The main character ran up from the side. He was running at full speed down the corridor to help his friend. Nin shouted angrily at the fighter to stop. The warrior looked at him with displeasure. The fighter swung his sword and began to threaten the protagonist. Nin stood and looked at him calmly. The warrior threatened the main character with an angry voice that he would face the death penalty for his actions. Nin reminded the fighter in a stern voice that it was illegal to raise a sword against his comrades. The warrior looked at the main character with displeasure and sternly asked who he was. Nin didn't answer the fighter. He pulled back his cloak and showed the sword on his belt. Su was very scared. She realized that her friend had managed to secretly drag the sword with him. The fighter knelt before the protagonist and greeted him as commander. He gave his name as Han Li. The people around were very surprised when they realized that the warrior called the main character a commander. Ye looked at the protagonist in surprise. He realized that he had the Northern King's sword. The protagonist told the fighter Han Li to get up. There was no need for unnecessary formalities. Su very angrily threatened the guy that she would tell his mother about his fight. The protagonist turned around. He asked the girl to give him her phone number. Nin took the phone in his hands. He ordered Han Li to remove the guy's body, which was lying on the floor. The fighter obeyed the order and began to pull out the unconscious guest's body. A young man stood to the side, watching all this with fear. The main character held the phone in his hands. After that, he got ready to call a man he knew. The man was relaxing on his couch. He picked up the phone and asked who was calling him. Nin introduced himself to his partner on the phone and said that it was he who was calling. The owner was very surprised when he realized that the main character had just called him. The man told the protagonist with great excitement that he hadn't visited Ning's family for some time, but he could come at any time. The protagonist looked at the guy in the hallway. He asked his partner on the phone, "Is there a certain Liang Zhou in their family?" The man asked the boy with concern what his relative had done. The main character asked his partner with displeasure, "Will he be able to teach the guy a lesson himself?" Liang stood and silently looked ahead. He didn't know what to do now. The angry owner sternly demanded that the main character give the phone to his relative. Liang picked up the phone. He greeted his grandfather with great fear. The old man sternly ordered his surprised relative to kneel down. Liang was very scared. Grandpa sternly demanded once again that the boy fall to his knees. The guy realized that he had no choice. He fell to his knees in front of the main character. The old man collapsed onto the couch. He thought to himself in fear that he was trying to save the life of his relative. The protagonist turned around and handed the phone to his girlfriend. He said it was late and she needed to go home. Sue told the guy she agreed. Tan waved his hand to the guests. He said in a frightened voice that they had to disperse. The festive party was over. Tan asked the protagonist from the side in surprise, "Is his strength really on par with the general?" Nin calmly replied to his friend, "That's all it is." Yu thought to himself that the main character's strength far exceeded the rank of a general. Tan turned to the side. He asked his friend what they had said about the commander. Yue watched the protagonist interact with his girlfriend. He realized that the King of the North didn't want too much information about him to become known. Yue decided to change the subject. He told his friend that Yuxin's girlfriend was drunk and needed a ride home. The drunk girl was sleeping on the bed. She didn't hear or see anything around her. The protagonist told his friend that he was knowledgeable about medicine and could help him. Yue told his partner that he would be fine in a couple of days. Tan told his friend with a smile that he was very grown up, but was still afraid of doctors. The protagonist extended his hand forward and a bright glow appeared near it. He told the guy not to move. A stream of energy hit the guy's body. After that, he started coughing blood. Tan looked at his friend from the side with fear. Tan supported his friend with his hands. He asked with concern if everything was okay. The main character asked the guy with interest and slyly if he felt better. Tan turned around at the main character with displeasure. He shouted that the guy was coughing up blood and needed to be taken to the hospital. Yue reached his hand to his face. He continued to cough. Blood was still appearing in his mouth. The guy looked at his hands with joy and amusement. He felt better. A surprised Tan stood next to him. The protagonist explained to his partner with a smile that his body would now be fine. The healed guest thanked him. She told the protagonist from the side that she was tired. Nin looked at the girl and said that he could take her home. Tan picked up his drunken girlfriend and prepared to carry her home. Yue said goodbye to the protagonist. Ning said goodbye to him in return. The main character was walking with his girlfriend when a group of unfamiliar warriors ran down the corridor. The fighter in the black suit excitedly told the guy that their boss wanted to talk to him. After a short pause, the protagonist calmly told the warrior that he could lead him. Nin and his companions went up to the desired floor. Then, they exited the elevator. The man told the protagonist in an angry voice that the girl, Sue, had nothing to do with this matter. She needed to be taken home. A woman stood next to him, silent. Sue got angry. She warned the boss in a displeased voice not to even think about offending the guy. The main character turned around and put his hand on his girlfriend's shoulder. He promised her that everything would be fine. The girl looked at him with worry. The guards threw the girl out the door. She tried to break back inside. Sue took the phone in her hands and looked carefully ahead. She was very worried about her friend. The boss in the chair sternly asked the protagonist if he knew who had been wounded this morning. Nin stood opposite the man. He angrily asked who was being cut today. The angry man slammed his fist on the chair. He said the protagonist had injured his son, Du Hao, and crippled his arm. The boss threatened the protagonist with an angry voice that he would die tonight. The fighters on the side prepared to rush the guy. The boss's phone rang. His partner said angrily that Du Yuan had decided to attack one of his brothers. Yuan shouted at the caller in a dissatisfied voice that he must definitely avenge his son. The main character stood and calmly watched as a whole group of armed fighters ran towards him. Nin suddenly drew his sword. His eyes lit up and he prepared to fight off the attackers. The main character swung his blade in all directions, scattering the fighters and striking them. Dead warriors lay on the ground. The protagonist walked past them with a blade in his hand. Yuan asked the guy in fear, "Is he really a general-level martial artist?" A frightened woman stood behind him. The boss looked at the protagonist with fear. He couldn't understand how this could be possible. Frightened people ran into the room. Tan asked the main character if everything was okay with him. Yuan was frightened. He suddenly rushed towards the guy and started shouting for him to help him. Tan was unhappy. He started fighting back against the man and screaming for him to leave him alone. The woman grabbed her weapon and held the girl with her hand. She shouted at the people not to move. The guys stood to the side and looked at their girlfriend with fear. The woman was holding her like a hostage. Nin looked angrily at the attacker and sternly demanded that she let the girl go. The woman angrily shouted at the main character that he could get to her in the blink of an eye. The attacker held the frightened girl by the hand. She shouted that she could pull the trigger and the guy wouldn't have time to save his friend. The main character angrily asked the woman, why did she decide that he was just a general? The attacker held the girl by the hand. She asked the guy again. What did he say? A bright glow appeared around the main character. He was surrounded by blue energy. Gradually, clouds of energy around the guy began to spread in all directions. People around became scared. Tiny Yue felt a strong energy pressure. Yuen said in a frightened voice that such energy pressure could stop even an army. The boss looked at the terrible protagonist and shouted words about the god of war. Nin very sharply pulled out his blade and rushed forward at the woman. The protagonist quickly dashed past the woman, managing to cut off her hand holding the weapon on the fly. The attacker looked to the side in fear and saw that her arm had flown off. The main character ran up to his girlfriend and grabbed her sharply with his hand. He pulled her aside. Nin grabbed the frightened girl with his arms. He told her with concern not to look ahead. The guy hugged his tearful girlfriend and told her in a calm voice that everything was okay now. The protagonist angrily asked the woman if she realized the price she would pay for attacking his girlfriend. The attacker fell to her knees and began to apologize to the protagonist. Nin turned around and looked sternly at the woman. He said that he wanted to protect his girlfriend. The protagonist threw aside several tablets with magical inscriptions. They fell to the floor in front of the surprised woman. Nin held his girlfriend in his arms. He said he didn't want to dirty his Northern King's sword just yet. The woman looked at the black card in her hands in surprise. The attacker remained silent. She held the card in her hands and looked at it carefully. Yu looked at the woman in surprise. He noticed that she was holding a sword sign in her hands. The main character was leaving the door. A friend from behind him asked with displeasure, will he really let the attackers go so easily? The protagonist went outside and loaded his girlfriend into the car. His friends were standing next to him. Ning, inside the car, asked his friend to give them a ride to the Su family's house. Tan told his friend that he would do everything. The driver sat behind the wheel of the car. He told himself that the girl was scared and that he would have to apologize to her grandmother. He also decided to take revenge on Boss Yuan. Yu sat on a chair next to his friend. He angrily told him that even the god of war could die if he received a mark like the woman's. Tan excitedly asked his friend what kind of card the woman had received. Yue replied to his companion that he would explain everything to him later. A group of fighters ran into the room. Commander Xiao stood in front of them. A stranger came out of the room. He was wiping his hand with a handkerchief. The commander looked at him distrustfully. She said in a dissatisfied voice that the person in front of him was the Qinzhou leader named Zuo Zhong'an. Suo continued to wipe his hand. He told the captain with a smile that he had already taken the trouble away. Behind him in the room, bodies lay on the floor. Xiao looked at his partner with displeasure and asked what the secret department was doing here. Suo smiled slyly and explained to his partner that he was only following orders. The guy suddenly jumped up from the floor and flew up to the ceiling. The fighters stood to the side and looked at him. Xiao looked ahead with displeasure. He didn't like Suo's appearance. The moon rose over the city. The girl was sitting inside her large house. Su was relaxing in the bathroom. She remembered with excitement that it was the first time she had seen bloodshed so close. The girl remembered very carefully how the main character saved her from an unknown woman. Su splashed some water from the bathtub on her face. She decided not to think about it anymore. The girl was standing in the shower. She decided to quickly wash up and go to bed. This would help her forget everything. After the bath, she dried her hair with towels. She entered a large room. The main character was sitting and holding a document in his hands. He was reading something attentively. Nin was sitting on the sofa. He turned around and looked at the girl with displeasure. She was surprised when she saw him there. Su got really angry. She angrily asked the main character what he was doing here. The girl turned around and ran away in fear. The protagonist jumped to his feet and looked at her in surprise. Su ran to the side. She thought shyly to herself that she was very embarrassed that the guy saw her like this. The girl ran to the drawer and began quickly taking out various clothes. She decided to quickly find something to wear and go to bed. Su suddenly stopped, she thought, because she couldn't understand what she was doing. The girl threw her clothes on the ground in displeasure. She reproached herself for what she thought. Su looked ahead, embarrassed. She began to calm herself down. The girl put on a small pink dress. She went out into the hall and thanked the guy for saving her. Su looked ahead in surprise. She realized that no one had responded to her words. The girl walked around the room. She saw that the sofa the guy had been sitting on was already empty. Su looked around with displeasure. She angrily asked the guy where he had disappeared to. The main character was sitting on the roof of the house at the time. He didn't react to the girl's scream. He didn't hear her. The protagonist sat on the roof of a building in a meditative pose. There was a purple glow near his hands. The guy held out his hand in front of him. He looked closely at the small glowing ball. The protagonist suddenly threw himself out the window. He flew straight onto the bed where she was lying. Nin glanced at the bed and saw her sleeping there. She was mumbling something in her sleep. The guy extended his hand with the magic ball towards the girl's body. Energy began to enter her. She woke up abruptly and looked at the guy in surprise. Nin felt very embarrassed. The girl jumped up and sharply asked her friend, "What is he doing to her?" The main character excitedly explained to his girlfriend that he used the pill for energy. Sue got angry. She threw a pillow at her friend. The girl shouted at him that he wanted to fool her. Sue ran out of the room with tears in her eyes. She shouted at the guy as she ran that he wouldn't even be able to carry a small child. Surprised, Nin stood and held a pillow in his hands. The girl ran into the hall to her grandmother and shouted that her friend was a pervert. The old woman was sitting on the sofa. She turned around and asked the girl what the main character did. Sue fell silent. She felt very embarrassed and did not answer the old woman. The girl calmed down. She told her grandmother that the guy came into her room with a pill. He wanted to use it to strengthen her body with energy. The grandmother brought the glass to her face. She cheerfully told the girl that she shouldn't have made noise. Sue thought about it. She remembered the main character. The guy seemed very nice to her. Suddenly, the girl shyly shouted something. The old woman thought with a smile that Sue herself could not sort out her feelings. The protagonist entered the university. A man there showed him Professor Van's old notebook. It contained notes about a hike in the mountains. Nin was sitting at the table. He was carefully reading a book and studying its contents. The guy saw that 3 pages had been torn out in one place. The teacher told the boy excitedly that he hadn't known about this. Nin looked at the diary. He said it only contained entries for 7 days of Professor Van's expedition. The teacher asked the main character with concern, "Will the missing pages really be a big problem?" Nin explained to his partner that someone had torn out the pages for a reason, but they could use clues from the previous 7 pages to narrow the search area. The man felt relieved. He told the guy that he was glad that he could help him. The main character will thank the teacher. He asked if he had any conditions. The teacher asked the boy in a very shy voice to visit his laboratory if he had the chance. The protagonist was sitting at the table. He promised the teacher that he would visit him before the lecture. The man thanked the guy. Nin walked into the science lab, and his teacher showed him his calculations on the board. He wanted to replace energy resources like oil. The boy explained to the teacher that anti-gravity devices on airplanes could be used to reduce takeoff and landing times. Nin stood up. He told the teacher that nuclear energy is currently the best replacement for fossil fuels. The teacher complained to the boy that they didn't have enough money to build new laboratories for research. The main character put his hand on the man's shoulder and said that he already knew about it. Nin told the man that for the past 5 years their country had been planning to engage in nuclear energy. The protagonist explained to his partner that research required huge investments and the best experts. Nin headed for the exit. He invited the man to attend his lecture. The teacher told the guy that he would definitely stop by. Inside the science classroom, students were sitting with computers on their desks. The protagonist headed toward the podium. The students couldn't figure out what this guy was doing there. The student raised his hand. He told the protagonist to hurry and take his seat. The professor was supposed to arrive soon. The main character smiled at the guy and cheerfully thanked him for the warning. The students looked at the stranger behind the podium with displeasure. They didn't understand why the guy didn't leave. The doors opened. The president entered the room. Next to him were Professors Lee and Zhou. The protagonist stood at the podium. At that time, the president and the professors were sitting at the tables. The protagonist introduced himself and told the students that this would be his first lecture at Beyond University. The students couldn't believe that the professor standing before them was truly young. They decided that the guy had bought himself the position. The main character pointed at the board. He told the students that computer science is an important subject. The students in the audience began asking the main character to tell them something new. Nin angrily clutched the pointer in his hands. He thought the young people were very impudent. He decided to show them his abilities. The main character stood inside the auditorium and looked attentively at the students. There was complete silence in the hall. Lee excitedly offered the president to help the protagonist win the audience's attention. The president looked closely at the protagonist. He told his colleague that they should trust the guy. Nin told the students in the department that he had sent the material to their computers. They could read it in their free time. The student angrily told the protagonist that they could create a group so that it would be easier to share files. Nin reached his hand towards the keyboard. He told the students in a sly voice that he would send everything to them directly. The students were surprised to hear such words from the teacher. They didn't understand how he could send them information directly. The students looked at their computers in great surprise. They started having problems with their work. Did he turn around and ask the man if it was really bad? The director told his colleague not to worry. The main character asked the students with excitement, "Will this be more interesting for them?" The students were very amazed. They looked at their teacher with admiration. The protagonist told the excited students that they would now talk about information security. The director watched the main character closely. He expected the guy to show himself now. Nin stood at the podium and told the students something. The students listened to him very attentively. The guy turned around and asked his friend with the phone with interest what he was doing. A student recorded a video of the main character's performance and decided to post it online. The guy inside the house ran into the boss's room and wanted to show him something. The guest was holding a phone in his hands. He showed his boss at the computer a video about their university. The guy looked up from his computer and turned around in surprise. He saw their audience on the video recording. The boss enthusiastically grabbed the keyboard on his laptop. He decided to show the new teacher what he was capable of. The main character stood near the podium, lecturing to students. At that moment, the loading screen began to load. A video of a dancing mouse appeared on the big screen. The students were surprised. They thought someone had given them a virus. The protagonist looked at the computer monitor with the dancing animal. Someone told Professor Nin that the firewall on his computer was not working properly. The students in the audience cheered and laughed. Someone said that even the professors were hacked. Nin turned away with displeasure. He told himself that this was a great annoyance for him. The students were sitting in a dorm room in front of a monitor. One of them said cheerfully that the professor had a leaky firewall. Suddenly, a voice came over the loudspeaker. The hacker was very surprised and scared. The stranger angrily asked him if he had considered the consequences. The protagonist reached for the video camera. He told the frightened student that there was no reason to be proud of being one of thousands of hackers. An image of the burglars appeared on the large screen. The student pointed forward in fear and said that Professor Nin, who was currently giving a lecture, was in front of them. The students laughed loudly. They were having fun when they looked at the burglars in the dorm room. The guy in the room got scared. He shouted at his friend to turn off the computer quickly. The agitated burglar tried to turn off the computer, but the button didn't work. The student shouted at his friend to unplug the cable quickly. The guy rushed over and yanked the cable. The image on the big screen in the classroom disappeared. The students in the room were very scared. They didn't know what to do next. The guy said with worry that they could be expelled from the university for this. The burglar grabbed his phone and decided to call his teacher to help him against the main character. The worker was sitting in an office in a large building. It was the financial company Entai. The worker was sitting at the table. He listened to his friend's complaint about Ningbei over the phone. The worker's name was Zhou Ling. He told his friend that he knew this university well. He promised his partner that he would figure it out completely. Zhou stretched his hands. He joyfully told himself that he was the head of security for a large company. The worker started tapping his fingers on the keyboard. He said angrily that the real boss was coming into play. Lee approached the protagonist with a cup in his hands. He happily said that they had taken control of those monkeys. Nin replied to the teacher that the students turned out to be very good. The main character looked closely at his monitor and noticed something suspicious there. The teacher anxiously asked the guy what was wrong. Nin was sitting near the laptop. He told the teacher that someone had tried to hack them. Lee decided that the same students wanted to hack them again. He reminded the guy that the principal wouldn't punish them. The protagonist looked closely at the monitor. He told the man in a serious voice that the wrong attackers were already trying to hack them. Lee told the guy with great excitement that if someone tried to break into their network, it would be very bad. The protagonist looked at the monitor. He told the man that the computer was new and there was nothing to steal from it. Nin glared angrily ahead. He said that he wouldn't let anyone get to the other computers. Joe sat with a cup of coffee near his computer. He said in a satisfied voice that this guy's skills didn't particularly impress him. An employee ran into the room. He excitedly shouted to his boss that someone had hacked their company's firewall. Joe was very scared when he heard such news from his subordinate. Some kind of glitch was visible on the monitor. Chu worked furiously on the keyboard. He shouted that he personally installed the protection. Several hackers even tested it. The workers shouted in a disgruntled voice that no one had been able to hack them yet. He didn't understand who could be behind the attack. An agitated subordinate told his boss that they might have provoked one of the big shots. Joe looked ahead with great fear. He could not believe that this could happen. The director ran into the office. He angrily asked the employee at the computer what was going on. The director Yanan told the guy in a dissatisfied voice that his security system didn't work at all. The man shouted at the guy that all the accounts were blocked. One of the employees couldn't log into the system. Joe glanced at the computer. He said with alarm that someone had changed his administrator status. A group of disgruntled workers were looking at their computers. They were having problems with their computers and data. The worker excitedly told his boss that the attacker had passed through 7 fires in 15 seconds. Yanan was very surprised when he heard such words from the guy. Joe continued sitting at the computer. Joe looked away. He said in a cunning voice that he knew who did all this. He was now waiting for the attacker to name the price. An unfamiliar voice from the speakers told the frightened people that he was not some kind of blackmailer. The company employees looked at the computer in surprise. They waited to hear what the stranger would say. Yan An knocked the guy aside with a powerful punch. He shouted into the computer to his partner that this joke had gone too far. The guy told the company employees in an angry voice that someone from their company had hacked his computer. The company's employees all turned in unison towards the frightened Joe. The employees asked the guy with displeasure what was going on. Joe decided to justify herself. He said with a smile that it was all a little game. A frightened Joe stood in the office. He spread his arms out to the sides and decided to somehow justify himself to his colleagues. Chinan shouted at his subordinate in a menacing voice that he had brought big problems on them instead of doing his job. The director bowed before the computer. He apologized to Mr. Ning and promised to pay him 500,000 as an apology. The main character told the company employees through the speakers that he was not interested in money. The guy promised the delighted employees that all their company's systems would be back to normal within an hour. This should be a lesson to them. The director and his subordinates bowed to the computer and thanked the protagonist. Lee stood next to the main character. He raised his hand and praised the guy for his excellent work. At that moment, someone suddenly opened the door. Asura ran into the room. She called out to the protagonist in fear. The girl looked happily at the surprised guy at the table. A surprised teacher stood next to the main character. Sue smiled slyly and cheerfully at the guy. She called him professor and greeted him. The teacher headed for the exit. He told the girl that she could now talk to Ninbei. She angrily pointed her hand at the guy. She sternly asked him, did he really take her food card? The main character took out a small card. He told the girl that she should not eat today. Sue wanted to take her card back from the guy. She told him he wouldn't let her have breakfast or lunch. The main character held a card in his hand and didn't want to give it to the girl. Sue wanted to take it back. Yusin looked at her friend. She suggested that they go and get something to eat outside the university. Sue reached out her hands to the guy and still wanted to take her card. She didn't want her friend to cause her trouble. She angrily demanded that the protagonist return the card to her. She stretched out her hands to him. The hero jumped aside with a very quick and dexterous movement, card in hand. The girl lost her footing and fell into a chair. Sue turned around and looked after the guy. She asked him angrily, where was he going? The protagonist held a card in his hands. He said he was going to the cafeteria and invited the girl to come with him. Sue looked at the guy with shining eyes and joyfully told him that she was following him. There was a long line inside the cafeteria. A group of students were standing near the counter. Sue told her companions that they could go upstairs. That's where most of the teachers ate, eating better food. The protagonist pointed his finger at the Thane at the table and asked with displeasure, is this guy also a teacher? The student looked at his friends very happily and waved his hand to them. He greeted them. Yusin approached the table. She asked the guy with displeasure, how did he end up here? The student slyly replied that no one was looking at him. The girl sat at the table. She extended her chopsticks with great joy and gusto to take the food on the tray. The main character quickly swatted the disgruntled girl's hand aside with his chopsticks. Sue asked the main character discontentedly if he had forgotten that he himself had invited her here to eat. The protagonist sternly reminded the girl that he simply invited her along. He didn't even mention food. An annoyed Sue asked the guy, does he really want her to watch him eat? Ning put the food in his mouth. He told his partner that she would be able to eat when her purple key energy was fully absorbed. The students were surprised to hear such words from the main character. Tan didn't know exactly what purple key was. An unfamiliar guy entered the room. He said something about the purple key from the east. The students turned to look at him in surprise. The guy held out his hand in front of him with a smile. He happily said that purple chi is called the aura of a sage. The stranger said with a smile that a person with the protection of purple key could be considered a sage. The stranger stood near the students and persistently told them something. Tan shouted at him to get lost quickly. The guy stood near the table. He said with admiration that purple key is even rare among martial arts masters. The stranger continued to enthusiastically tell the students about purple chi energy. After a long conversation, the guy sat down at the table. He told the girl that this is why purple chi is called the aura of a sage. The protagonist looked closely at the stranger. He told him about protecting the body with purple ki. A stream of enormous energy appeared above the guy. He asked his partner, did he really talk about that? The students looked at the protagonist surrounded by energy with surprise and admiration. The boy repeated to himself in amazement, could this really be purple chai? Yusin folded her hands in admiration. She told her friend that he possessed magic. The stranger was frightened. He jumped to his feet and said excitedly that only sages possess purple ki. After a short pause, the guy excitedly asked the main character who he was. Ning at the table told the girl that purple qui is a very good thing. She promised to give her more tomorrow. Sue turned away with displeasure. She told the guy that she didn't want anything from him anymore. The student ran up to the main character and shouted to him that he wanted to get some energy for himself. Nin asked his partner with displeasure, who was he? The student excitedly told the protagonist that he was even ready to pay him for protection. Yusin turned around and explained to the stranger that the protagonist didn't need money. He was the eldest heir in the Ning family. The boy turned around with great excitement. He became interested when he heard about the Nin family. She asked the protagonist with displeasure if he would give her something to eat today. He explained to his partner that she had to be patient. Yusin slyly told the students that she couldn't imagine how they would live together once they got married. Sue turned away. She told her friend in an angry voice that she and the guy were just friends. Sue told her friend in an angry voice that she had said from the very beginning that she would not marry the main character. Nin stood near the table. He reminded his girlfriend that they could break off the engagement at any moment. He promised to protect Sue's family no matter what. The protagonist turned around and headed off. Sue looked after him in surprise. The student sat at the table and watched the main character. Sue folded her hands and looked down in front of her. Yusin turned to her friend with displeasure and asked, does she already regret it? Tan told the girl in a didactic tone not to joke about such things anymore. Sue looked sadly ahead. She remembered her recent conversation with the guy. The main character stood near the large window in the office. He called his father. Nin told the man that he had decided to break up with his girlfriend. He needed to discuss the broken engagement with his grandmother. The man on the phone asked the main character what had just happened. Nin turned off the phone. He stood and looked out the window at the street for a very long time. The protagonist arrived at the university building. He was in the gravity research lab. Professor Lee wanted to introduce him to the other scientists. Lee told his colleagues that the protagonist was a respected professor in their field and would be the honorary director of this laboratory. The scientists were very surprised. They didn't believe that such a young protagonist could be a professor. Nin approached the table. He said in a dissatisfied voice that the scientific equipment was very simple. A scientist named Zion told the protagonist in a dissatisfied voice that their laboratory equipment was one of the best in the university. The guy pointed to the equipment on the table in the direction of the protagonist. He proudly said that the gravity measuring device cost 8 million. Nin turned around. He said in a thoughtful voice to the side that he had seen devices that cost 15 million. The scientists were very surprised when they heard the words from the main character. They couldn't believe that such a thing could happen. Zion asked the guy in surprise, "Did he really see a device called A513? Ning explained to his partner that there are only 5 such devices. 2 are at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, 3 are on the northern border. The main character calmly told his colleagues that one of these devices came here tonight. The scientists were very surprised when they heard such words from the young man. They couldn't believe that they would see such an expensive device. Nin asked the scientists with displeasure, "Is it really that bad with funding?" The girl said in a disgruntled voice that no one would want to invest money in them. Most people consider them scammers. The protagonist looked at his phone. He told the employees that the Ning conglomerate would invest in them. In the future, he wanted to receive 90% of their profits in patents. Zion said to the guy with displeasure that he wanted to get too much for himself. Lee shouted at the scientist to shut up. The professor excitedly explained to his colleague that the protagonist's research in this area surpassed all theirs. If he needed money, he could have done without it. The professor approached the main character from behind and joyfully called him by name. Lee smiled happily at the guy and explained that they agreed to his proposal. The main character called and asked the girl Mu Shi to transfer $1 billion to the account of Beyond University. The protagonist suggested changing the direction of research. They could start with basic anti-gravity devices. The man agreed with the boy. The scientists went to their research desks. They were busy with their research. The main character was holding a document with a scientific paper in his hands. He studied it carefully. Late evening came to the street. People inside the building were very surprised when they heard the noise of a helicopter coming from above them. An aircraft descended from a great height between the buildings. The scientists ran out into the street. The girl shouted that a helicopter had landed on the sports ground. A soldier in a black uniform emerged from the helicopter. He told the men they shouldn't come any closer. He was conducting a level A escort mission. Zion jumped out into the street and shouted that it was a huge helicopter. He explained to his colleague that such a device could deliver tanks to the battlefield. The protagonist headed toward the helicopter. A girl behind him warned the guy that he couldn't go near it. The fighters stood in a row. A warrior named Lu Qin greeted the commander. The protagonist walked among the soldiers. They all called him commander. The scientists were surprised when they saw how the warriors greeted their colleague. Lee said in amazement that he initially thought Ning Bei was just a scientific genius. The workers on the side looked at the main character in surprise and could not understand who he was. The main character returned home late in the evening. He opened the doors. Nin entered the house. He asked his parents with displeasure why they still weren't sleeping. The protagonist's worried parents approached him. They were unhappy because he had quarreled with his girlfriend. The protagonist turned away. He told his parents that the girl was against the marriage. He advised them to go to bed. Nin went out into the evening street. He looked around very carefully. The main character suddenly jumped up onto the roof of the building. Xiao bowed from above the roof and greeted the protagonist with respect. Nin asked his partner if he had found the third person he was supposed to kill. Xiao told the boy that the man he needed was among Zuo Zhongdan's men in the Qinzhou Anbu leaders faction. They had always had a complicated relationship with the Special Operations Department. The protagonist waved his hand at his subordinate and told him to ignore the man for now and leave. The main character stood on the roof of the building. He looked at the big moon in the sky for a very long time. The girl stood in her house and looked out the window at the moon in the night sky. Sue still couldn't go to sleep. She held the pillow in her hands and looked out the window. The grandmother asked the girl, "Is she really still awake?" Sue fell onto the bed in fright. She shouted to the old woman that she was almost asleep. Sue asked the old woman at the entrance to the room why she herself wasn't sleeping. The grandmother told the girl that Aunt Qing called her and told her about her breakup with the main character. The old woman promised the girl that there would be no marriage. No family would ever raise this issue again. The girl's grandmother told her that she continued to refuse marriage to the main character. Nin is not the kind of guy who would pursue a girl. The old woman told her partner that if she was refusing marriage, then that was how it should be. Grandma turned and walked out the door. She said it would be best for the bride to break off the engagement. This would help the girl save face in the future. Sue fell to the floor and began to cry after the old woman left the room. Sue sat on the floor very upset. She told herself in a sorrowful voice that she could find someone else. The grandmother walked down the empty corridor of the building. She wished the girl not to regret it. There was a stranger standing on the side of the street. He looked closely at the old woman who came out into the street. The stranger grabbed the phone. He called and joyfully informed his partner that the Ning family had broken off the engagement. The pretty old lady said that Chief Gu had blessed them with his presence and that it was a great honor for the Su family. Gu smiled and told Auntie that she was too kind and asked who he was compared to her. His friend also greeted Grandma Su. The grandmother exclaimed in amazement that this young man was truly wonderful and that the Gu family was blessed by the gods. Gu remarked that his son was far from Qinhe. He was one of their city's rare talents. The boy approached his grandmother and quietly whispered in her ear that Uncle Gu was here with a marriage proposal. Gu told Auntie that their families had known each other for decades, and Kang Kang liked Qinhe, so how about they get married? Grandma replied that they knew young people in their day, and she needed to ask Qinhe's opinion. Gu exclaimed, waving his hand to the side, that he was in no hurry and asked to bring in the gifts. Before he could say this, his men began to carry many huge wooden chests into the room. Grandma Su was very surprised and blushed a little as she asked what it was. Then the man opened all these chests and explained that these were engagement gifts. The boy who was standing next to his grandmother looked at her carefully, and she could not say anything. The boy told Uncle Gu and Kankan that they had come a very long way and must be tired. He invited them to see their rooms. Suddenly, a servant entered the room and told the lady that there were important guests outside. When the grandmother asked who exactly, the man had already started to enter the room. He explained that it was he, Zhang Zhongqiang. The man had his hands in his pockets and was already standing at the threshold of the house. Grandma recognized Commander Zhang and immediately invited him to come in for some tea. Zhang Zhongqian exclaimed that it was not worth it and pointed his finger at the card with the dragon and asked to accept it. The golden card flew towards the grandmother, and she looked at it carefully, surprised. Everyone who was in the room also looked at the map, which was right on the table. Kankan came as close to the table as possible, and, picking up this strange thing from the table, asked what it was. Gu approached the boy and asked him in a rude tone to put it back immediately, and he threw it on the table. Kankan asked his father what he was doing, and he replied that it was none of his business and he asked him not to interfere. The boy approached his grandmother and thought that if they took this card, the entire Su family would be in danger. Grandma suddenly closed her eyes sadly and asked Qinhui to call Bayer. Before they could finish speaking, a girl appeared in the room and approached the guests. The girl was a little furious and blushing. She exclaimed that she would call herself. She asked the man, looking him sternly in the eyes, whether Ningbei had sent him, and how beautifully he spoke. But in the end, he harbored a grudge and set his people on Grandma. The girl was simply shocked by what was happening and dialed Ningbei on her phone. When the boy answered the call, he walked into the room with an important air and said that he was already here. Zhang Zhongxian immediately bowed before him and called the boy the King of the North. Ningbei took the card and said he would accept this sign. All members of the Zhang family from the 3 provinces could come and try to kill him. Zhang Zhongxian suddenly fell to his knees and exclaimed with his head down that he simply did not dare to do this. And the grandmother sighed very sadly and heavily, closed her eyes and lowered her head down. The girl clenched her fists and called Ningbei a hypocrite and a liar. How could it be that someone like Zhang Zhongqiang would act without his orders? But the man who was sitting on his knees suddenly raised his head and began to make excuses. But the boy came as close to him as possible and asked him to shut up, hitting him on the cheek with his hand. The girl approached Ningbei and said, pointing her finger at him, that he always pretended to be a cool and powerful northern king, and now he came to scare his grandmother with this map of theirs. She raised her palm and exclaimed that she was telling him right away that if something happened to her grandmother, she would spend her whole life just trying to get even with him. When the girl tried to hit him, Zhang Zhongqian immediately rose from the floor and grabbed his weapon. He asked the girl not to dare touch him. The grandmother immediately approached the man and asked him to stop immediately. The man had already taken out his weapon and was very close to the girl and the boy. Then she asked him to act since he approached without the slightest fear of this man. She continued to beg him, tears in her eyes, to let him kill her. They were just ants in his eyes. The girl began to cry and say that although their Su family was weak, she, Su Qinhe, would never humiliate herself in front of him. Ningbei, without even turning to face Zhang Zhongqian, asked him to step back. When the man wanted to say something against the boy, he turned to him and started shouting at him to move back immediately. After this, he turned around and said that the money from this card could be used at any time. With them, the Su family would never again fall under anyone's control. He simply placed the card with the money on the table. The boy turned around and explained to the girl that he would never bother her again. He had already turned towards the door and said that anyone who caused trouble to the Su family would suffer the consequences. The grandmother and the boy who was standing next to her were very surprised by what was happening. Kankan suddenly started shouting and asked his guys to get out of there quickly. The boy took his grandmother by the arms and began to lead her into the room, and the girl remained standing in the middle. Suddenly, she began to cry very bitter tears, and her face turned red from her worries and what was happening. Ningbei was already outside and thought that today he had paid off his debt to the Su family. He explained that the engagement was broken off on his initiative, so he asked Zhang Zhongqian not to bother the Su family anymore, and he could pass this on to others. Meanwhile, luxury cars were parked next to each other on the street. The main character's expression suddenly changed and he looked intently ahead, his eyebrows drawn closer to his nose. The little girl ran to meet him and, blushing a little, called him brother. The boy was overjoyed to meet his little sister and named her Guogo. He immediately hugged his little sister and picked her up. The boy asked the fourth uncle why there were so many cars outside. The uncle explained that they had all come with marriage proposals. Ningbei was very surprised when he heard about the marriage proposal and asked if there was any unmarried girl in their family. They didn't come to see their little girl, Guoguo. It was still way too early for that. While they were talking, someone suddenly called the main character by name. The boy saw Mr. Lin standing before him. The man smiled and said that it was indeed him. Ningbei asked if he was the head of the Black Squad from the capital. He asked the man what exactly brought him here today. Then the man explained that he came to them with a marriage proposal, which surprised the boy greatly. The main character stroked his little sister's head with his hand and turned away from the man. Mr. Lin said he heard they had broken off their engagement with the Su family. His granddaughter was about their age, so he wanted to propose her as a bride. The guy who was standing next to the main character told him that he was far from the only one who came today with such an offer. Suddenly, the main character's expression changed again and he looked intently ahead. There were people in the room holding sheets of paper in front of their faces. When the boy entered the room, they immediately bowed before him and greeted His Majesty the King of the North. Ningbei thought that they were all only interested in his strength and status, and they were using their daughters as bargaining chips. Then the boy turned to them and said they had 1 minute to leave his house. The boys, holding leaves in their hands, were very surprised and wanted to protest. But before they could say a word, Ningbei asked not to force him to repeat it. Before he could finish speaking, the boys ran away. Gogo clung to her little brother and looked at him sadly. The boy grabbed the girl's head and told her everything was fine and she shouldn't worry. The man holding the white sheets of paper told Bayer that after this, no one would ever come to him with a marriage proposal again. Then the boy approached his little sister, lowering her from his arms to the floor, and told the man that he did not need matchmakers. Then he continued to say that he himself had broken off the engagement with the Su family. Now it was time to think about someone else. He suggests they at least look at these photographs, and he and his mother agree that they need to choose a bride. Before he could finish speaking, the boy had already torn the photographs into tiny pieces. The father was very surprised by his son's behavior, but the boy had already left. Zuo Linlong, daughter of the Zuo family of Jiangdong, and Cheng Yueyang, daughter of the Cheng family of Nanzhou, as well as the only daughter of the wealthiest man in Qinzhou, Lu Fen, and the daughter of the guardian of the northern plains, Lulu. Was it really true that they all offered him as wives? The girl asked her grandmother in surprise. Mrs. Su turned to Qinhe and replied that that was indeed the case and that he had refused them all. Then the girl became very happy and asked if he really hadn't chosen anyone. She exclaimed with a smile that she thought so, because he is stubborn and unyielding. Then Grandma asked Chinny if she really didn't like Ningbei. The girl blushed and told her grandmother not to even mention it. The way he treated her today was too much. Grandma called her silly and said that if Bayer was narrow-minded and really turned against the Su family, he wouldn't have come back then. When Zhang Zhongqian came to them and threw down his sign, he definitely hid it from Ningbei. Then the girl asked why he hadn't explained it. The grandmother replied that she had pounced on him with accusations without even asking why he had come. She tried to explain to her granddaughter that this was why he was so cold. Shinhee remarked that, even aside from that incident, he'd never shown any interest in her, and a childhood engagement meant nothing. Bayer had grown up on the northern border, where he had gone through many hardships, and did she really expect him to talk about love like these spoiled young gentlemen from their town? Speaking about the main character, the grandmother explained to her granddaughter that this was simply impossible. The girl's eyes filled with tears again, and, blushing a little, she asked her grandmother to forget about it. In any case, there is nothing that can be done now. Ningbei was already inside the room, looking very serious and calm. He was met by a girl who, smiling, exclaimed that Mr. Genius had finally arrived. When the boy saw a cup of tea on the table, he asked if she had brewed it. The girl replied that no, Jinyun had brewed the tea especially for him as a sign of respect. He waited for it for several hours but ran out of patience and went off to play. Ningbei was very surprised why he decided to do this as a sign of respect. The girl asked them to ignore him and instead talk about him. Mr. Genius, could he provide the Tang Corporation with an anti-gravity device? Then the main character looked at the girl and replied that only if she named at least one reason to help them. The girl said, crossing her arms over her chest, that to tell the truth, the whole thing was that last night another martial artist appeared in the Tang family, and he was 2 years younger than Qin Yun. The boy was even more surprised and asked if Tang Qingyun's position in the Tang family was under threat. The girl explained that they had strict rules and the heir was chosen through a competition. If Qingyun lost, he would be sent to work for the company. The boy wondered if this was for the best. Qingyun had a carefree nature. The opportunity to practice martial arts, unburdened by his position, was closer to his heart than being the head of the family. The girl replied that it wasn't that simple. If Qingyun lost his position as heir, her 2 uncles would come to power, and they were bad men who could lead the family to ruin. The girl turned away and said she would become merely a tool for a political marriage. She couldn't even imagine who she might marry. Then the main character looked at the girl and asked if this was all too much. She blushed a little again, looked into the boy's eyes and asked if he didn't know the ruthless nature of large families. Ningbei began to remember how his father grabbed his little son in his arms and ran away as quickly as possible, finding himself in the rain. The boy's gaze changed and he became very thoughtful and attentive. The boy closed his eyes and said to the girl, lowering his head, that he would help them. Then the girl clenched her fists and joyfully exclaimed, looking up, that this was simply great and wonderful. Ningbei tried to explain to her that it wasn't as simple as she thought. Then she asked what could be wrong. Ningbei replied that regarding the anti-gravity device project that she wanted to participate in, even he was thrown out of there. The boy held out the phone towards her, and when she looked at the screen, she was very surprised. The man asked if they had actually developed a complete anti-gravity device. How many people worked in their research lab? The guy replied that the final product had been tested, and besides their teacher, there were 8 students working in the lab, so there were 9 people in total. Professor Lee was asked to say a few words, and the man, lost in thought, began to talk about how this was the world's first anti-gravity device. It allows levitation to a height of up to 10 meters in a state of zero mass, supporting a weight of up to 100 kilograms and powered by electricity. The guys exclaimed that it was simply amazing, as expected from a professional who had dedicated decades to studying anti-gravity. The girl asked Professor Lee if he really created this device, but before she could finish speaking, the professor became very angry and barely restrained himself from being rude. The guy sitting next to the professor asked Mrs. Mu Shi what she meant by this. The teacher had dedicated many years to creating this device, and what kind of questions was she asking? A girl appeared at the door. She asked Hu Qiang what he had just said in a fit of anger. One of the guys asked what was going on and who she was. They couldn't understand what she was trying to say. Hu Qiang pointed his finger at Tang Yuxin, who allowed her to enter, and asked the guards to take her away from here. The girl stood in the middle of the hall, and the guys couldn't understand what was actually going on. A girl sitting in the hall asked Hu Tongshui why he was so loudly indignant and whether he was afraid that someone would tell the truth. The boy noticed that Ms. Mu Shi seemed to be harboring a grudge because their lab rejected her funding and was now spreading false rumors that discredited his teacher. The girl also got angry and said that he stole someone else's achievements and was bragging about them. Could this really be the result of their research? The guy asked Director Shu whether they should continue to cooperate with them. The man replied, clutching his beard. Of course it's worth it, but it's entirely possible they didn't do all this. That's what Shu Chengyi just suggested. The guy approached Mu Shi and said he was saying their lab had stolen someone else's work. Then he wondered if she had any proof. The girl exclaimed that no proof was needed because the person who had done all the calculations was right there. The girl pointed her hand at the main character, and all the guys who were in the hall were very surprised by his appearance. Shu Chengyi approached the boy and called Mr. Ning the youngest professor in the university. The girl was very surprised and asked how he knew. Ningbei looked at Shu Chengyi carefully, calling him by name. The guy also looked closely at the main character and, smiling, called him by name. Ningbei brought up the evidence and said the anti-gravity device was assembled using temporary parts. After 3 or 5 experiments, the device would become unusable. Hu Qiang exclaimed, pointing his finger that this was all nonsense. They had conducted 7 experiments that night. Then the boy approached this liar and, looking into his eyes, asked if it was true. Hu Qiang was also angry, but he was seriously scared and asked him to see for himself. The device glowed with a bright golden light and huge yellow lightning bolts emanated from it. The boys were very surprised by what was happening and immediately all stood up from their seats. They were all interested, and they also wanted to look at this magnificent device. The young man exclaimed that this was a true scientific miracle. A breakthrough in anti-gravity research would give a huge boost to the entire aerospace industry. Is the main character really disappointed because the anti-gravity device works perfectly? The professor suddenly rose from his chair and looked closely at the device. Ningbei explained that key components were already at their limits. Hadn't he noticed that the device was becoming increasingly noisy? The golden apparatus really did make more and more noise, and the professor got scared. He began to approach the apparatus and asked to stop it immediately and as quickly as possible, but the main character, looking up at the ceiling, exclaimed, looking at the golden device, that it was already too late. He put his hand forward and asked all the guys to step back immediately. There was a powerful explosion, and the device shattered into small pieces as it fell downwards. The guys were very surprised by what was happening because this was an expensive device. They called Professor Lee, who clutched his heart with his hand and clenched his fist. Zhu Chengye said that since the device was created by him, they should know the reason for its destruction. Professor Lee, seriously frightened again, blushed and looked closely at the broken apparatus. Hu Qiang began to approach the broken object and asked what was wrong with it, since he was going to fix everything. Hu Qiang immediately approached the device that was broken and grabbed the wrench in his hands. He began to sweat and thought about how it wouldn't open unless it was broken. The boy couldn't understand what was happening. Shu Chengye told Mr. Hu that if he created this device, then how could he not know how to disassemble it? Professor Lee was also very surprised and looked at the surrounding boys. Suddenly, the girl lowered her head and said that in fact, the anti-gravity device was designed and created by Professor Ning. Last night, they couldn't even figure out the design. When she admitted this, the boys were very surprised and exclaimed that this was too much. A representative of the Eastern Institute, Kun Feng, pointed his finger and said that they were simply a disgrace to the entire scientific community. The guys completely agreed with this man and raised their hands up shouting that everything was correct and now it was all clear. They're just a bunch of scum, and they've all been deceived. Suddenly, as the boy started to leave, Kong Feng asked Professor Ningbei to wait a bit. He explained that their institute was ready to provide him with a professorship and funds for research. He will also be able to recruit any assistants he wishes. Shu Chengyi told the protagonist that these terms were truly tempting. However, their research and development department employs more than 300 people, and each of them is ready to help him in everything. The man also wanted to cooperate with the boy, but he hesitated a little, not understanding what to do. Suddenly, a girl entered the room and addressed the young gentleman. She said that they should not waste their energy on persuasion, since her master had no shortage of money. She alone is responsible for $290 billion of working capital belonging to him. Ningbei lowered his head and calmly replied that it was true, and indeed something like that. When the men heard such an incredibly huge sum, their mouths opened in surprise. Zhu Chengye told Professor Ning that he understood that he had no shortage of funds, but Sankey Manufacturing still wanted to become his partner. The boy asked to discuss this issue with the girl, and in the future, Mu Shi will be responsible for this activity. The men thanked Professor Ningbei for the opportunity and asked him not to forget them. The girl told the main character that it was just a great job and asked if he could now fulfill her request. The boy turned to her and smiling replied that of course he could. Then she closed her eyes again, smiled sweetly, and said that she would tell her family everything right away. The girl immediately grabbed her phone and, blushing a little, began pressing the buttons. But she immediately became covered in beads of sweat, and the boy asked what was actually going on. She turned away and replied that nothing had happened. Then she called her father and told him she'd made arrangements with Ningbei. Her father thanked Yuxin and said he'd have someone contact her. Yuxin thought to herself that after all her efforts, the end result still needed to be passed on to others. The main character, in turn, also thought about it, and, lowering his head, took the phone in his hands. After which he raised the phone right in front of the girl's eyes and she looked at him in surprise. He said that Tang Yuxin would be in charge of the research laboratory, and he didn't know anyone else. The man then asked who he was to interfere in their affairs, and the boy replied that he was Ningbei, a friend of Yuxin and Jinyun. And if their family offended them again, he would kick them all out of Dragon City. The main character was holding a phone in his hands, and the girl was standing next to him. Yuxin was very excited and she liked the conversation of the boy who was talking right in front of her. Suddenly he turned to her and handed her the phone he had just been talking on. The girl burst into tears and, wiping away her tears, said that brother Ningbei was very impudent. She thanked the boy, and her brother started running into the room calling the girl sister. He was very worried about her and asked why she was crying when he approached her. He approached Ningbei and asked if he had just offended his sister. But the girl herself blushed and exclaimed that it was none of his business and hit her brother on the head with all her might with her fist. Misu appeared in the room and said that Yuxin was offended by the head of the Tang family, and not by her master. Then the guy clenched his fists and said that this old man was clearly tired of living, and when he returned, he would kill him. Yuxin asked the guy to keep quiet and asked if he wanted to ask Ningbei to be her teacher. The boy then immediately crossed his arms and told brother Ningbei that he would like to learn martial arts from him. The main character asked him not to bow and said that they were the same age. The boy did not calm down and again asked brother Ningbei if he was ready to teach him. The main character looked at him and replied that he agreed and asked him to come see him sometime when he had time. Then the guy was truly delighted and exclaimed that he thanked his brother. Meanwhile, the guys were loading something onto a huge truck, some huge heavy object. Shu Chengye commanded the entire process and raised his hand, asking everyone to come here. Yuxin was there too and, blushing a little, told the guys not to rush. Shu Chengye told Ms. Tang that for now it would be a temporary research laboratory, and in the meantime he would begin organizing people to establish a gravity research institute. The girl immediately agreed, but someone said that it was not worth doing, and the guys immediately turned in their direction. The main character said that there was no need to look for anything else, and that there was a pretty good laboratory here. Zhu Chengye told Professor Ningbei that a real research institute would be better suited for serious work. The man who appeared at the threshold of the room said, addressing the guys, that this was not necessary. He explained that he had trained talented assistants for their research laboratory. Zhu Chengye looked at this man in surprise and thought that he was from the military department and had a serious rank. Zhu Chengye asked permission to introduce Mr. Peigang, who came from the research laboratory of the University of Aeronautical Engineering. He also introduced him to Ningbei. Peigang said that he knew him and that he was the youngest professor. Since the founding of Beyond University, he created the world's first anti-gravity device. He explained to Professor Ningbei that he had brought the best scientists to him, 89 in all, and that they would be his and his leaders. Of course, he would be only nominal. Peigang said that in addition, all research costs will be covered by the state, and bonuses will be provided for any discoveries. He explained to Professor Ningbei that there was 10 million on this card, which he could use as a bonus to develop an anti-gravity device. The main character asked the people to stay, and he told them to take the money back. The man was very surprised and asked why, looking into his eyes. The boy asked if this was a large sum and said that it was not enough for anything. Peigang smiled and said that he knew that the Ning family did not need money, but this money was given to Professor Ning from above, and he could not take it back. The boy explained that he simply did the best he could. He entered the Balian Military Academy at the age of 7, and those same tall men protected him while he was growing up. That is why he does not need a reward, although he really appreciates the support. Peigang was very surprised by the boy's behavior and looked at him with a serious look. Shu Chengye smiled and said that nothing could be done. That was just his character. The man in uniform continued to stand, looking at the gold card with a surprised look. Meanwhile, it was already dark outside and bright stars illuminated everything around. Peigang picked up his phone and started dialing someone. He explained to Mr. Zhao that the matter had been resolved and he hadn't taken the money. He also told this man that this boy could become their comrade. The man was very surprised and asked to find out everything and do it at any cost. Peigang said that then he should give him more information, and how could he start if he knew nothing at all? But the man on the other end of the phone said in a very rude tone that he couldn't find anything. The man was surprised and asked how even he couldn't find anything. Did he know what message the internal system was giving him? Peigang listened carefully, and the man on the other end of the line replied that these were top secret level 3 files. The man in uniform was very surprised, and when the phone went off, he slumped his shoulders. The man raised his head up, and looking at the stars, he became curious about who he was. Meanwhile, there were people in the room working tirelessly. Zuen suddenly exclaimed that it was forbidden to bring a mobile phone into the lab, answer calls, or take photos. These are the rules, and whose phone is ringing now? She asked that it be handed over immediately. Then the guys all turned their heads towards the main character who was holding a phone in his hands. Yuxin sighed heavily and thought that this was the only person she couldn't order around. Ningbei picked up the phone and asked what had happened. Yuxin, meanwhile, asked the staff what had gotten them so distracted and urged them to get back to work immediately. The man on the phone told the protagonist that it had been noticed that someone was collecting information about him, and that it was about a certain Zhao Jingji. The boy looked closely at the man who was in the room and clenched his fists. Ningbei glanced at him and replied that everything was fine and asked him not to worry about it. He approached the man and asked if the information about him was confirmed. Peigang was simply shocked that the boy knew about this and so quickly. He grabbed his head with his hands and told the professor that he apologized to him and that he didn't mean anything bad. Ningbei said that if he wanted to know anything else about him, it would be better to ask him personally, rather than gathering information through some Zhao Jingji. The man in uniform smiled and blushed a little, and answered the boy that he understood everything perfectly. He was, of course, very surprised, since even with his epaulets, this man was very interesting. The man realized that his hands could reach anywhere. The guys were standing near some kind of device and were all holding some kind of notes in their hands. The protagonist also approached this equipment and asked his employees to begin. In front of them was a pink device that began to seem enveloped in a delicate white haze. The boys began to watch attentively as it began to rise upward and exclaimed that it really worked. The man in uniform told the boy that he would allocate 10 billion to the research fund for this development. Ningbei asked Yuxin if Tang Corporation would fully cover the research. She replied that of course, no problem. Peikong told Professor Ningbei that he could get more support for his research. Ningbei replied that he did not need money from the Ministry of War, but they would immediately share with them the technologies developed in this laboratory. The man clenched his fists and exclaimed to the professor that he was very generous and that he felt great shame in front of him. Ningbei said that even crows knew the meaning of gratitude. He would defend their country for the rest of his life and would demand no reward. The man was even more shocked by these words and immediately saluted the main character. Yuxin called the boy a great genius and asked him to go with her, promising to treat him to dinner. Before she could finish speaking, a young man approached them, and Ningbei asked Qinyun why he was there. The man then asked her to come with him, as they must be hungry after a hard day. In front of us, there was a luxurious restaurant called the Golden Cup. Qinyun asked to dine here and said he was treating me. I'd never been here before, but the place looked quite luxurious. When they approached the entrance, a man met them and asked if they had a VIP card. Qinyun was upset and said that there was no such map and he had never even heard of it. Then the man said, smiling, that in that case they should go to another room. Qinyun blushed angrily and asked if they really refused to let visitors through the main entrance without VIP cards. The man replied that he was afraid that nothing could be done about it, and that was the law in this establishment. Suddenly, a man with a cigarette in his teeth appeared in front of them, and a girl was standing next to him. He asked to move his car and gave some object to this guy. He agreed with his boss and immediately asked them to come in, continuing to smile. Yuxin asked them to forget about it and said they wouldn't eat there. Qingyun didn't let up and said he wasn't finished with him yet. Then the fat man turned in their direction and asked if they were students and if they were being told that such places were not for them. He approached the girl and, taking her by the chin, said that the girl was not bad and asked her to keep him company, saying that she clearly would not regret it. Before he could finish speaking, Qingyun hit him in the face with all his might, calling him a pervert, and then asked him to leave. The fat man clenched his fists and asked if he dared to attack him by calling him a beggar. He gave him 3,000 bucks and asked him to go eat at some diner and not interfere in his business. But the guy got even more angry and his face completely changed as he clenched his teeth. The man who met them at the entrance to the restaurant asked them to leave and said that the boss was a VIP and not someone to mess with. But the boy replied, a little sadly, that their status really was different. But the main character asked to take his 3,000, as he would need them for treatment. The fat man asked what he meant. Qingyun turned toward his comrade and smiled joyfully. Ningbei asked him to remember that if anyone reached out to Yuxin, he had to cut off that hand. The boy smiled, replied that he understood everything, and began to approach his opponent. The fat man was seriously scared and, moving back, asked the boy what he was actually planning. Qingyun had already begun to approach him faster and closer, directing his hand in his direction. He grabbed him by the wrist and with his other hand hit the curve of his arm with all his might. The fat man began to scream loudly in pain and his face completely changed, making a terrible grimace. He fell to his knees and grabbed his broken arm with his other hand. A girl nearby cried out that they were killing him. The protagonist turned to Yuxin and asked her to leave. He explained that it wasn't worth dining at such a lousy restaurant, But then suddenly some girl appeared and asked what was going on. This girl's name was A Chow, and she asked who was causing trouble in her restaurant. The fat man turned towards her and told Mrs. A Chow that these people had broken his arm and he asked her to deal with them. Then the girl turned to her comrade Juan and asked him to cripple them. Jinyun pointed his finger at the fat man and said that he was the one who started harassing his sister, and if she doesn't believe him, who can check the camera footage? Xuan turned to A Chow and looked into her eyes and asked if they would look at these records. The girl asked him if he knew why. With his skills, he was only fit for a security job, and she answered his question herself. It was only because he was a cretin and a scoundrel. She explained that Boss Wu, their guest of honor, was beaten up and still wanted to check something. The girl explained that she was paying him to work and asked him to take care of them immediately. Jinyun asked the protagonist what they should do in this situation. The boy replied that they were going to be attacked, and why was he still asking about it? He explained to his comrade that in this case, of course, they would fight. And he exclaimed, clenching his fists, that this was just great. Suan also clenched his fists and said that he did not want to beat the child. So he asked to move away and said that he would fight the second one. Jinyun jumped as high as he could and asked this guy to stop talking nonsense. Xuan, when he saw Jinyun's jump, was covered in beads of sweat and said that this boy was also a fighter. They began to approach each other as quickly as possible, and Jinyun already extended his hand towards the enemy. He hit him with all his might, and he flew back far and began to cover himself with both hands. One of the boys exclaimed that this guy dared to hit their brother Khan, and it was necessary to beat him. Khan held his hand on his shoulder and asked them not to come closer, as they were not his equal. The boys were very surprised and asked if he was telling the truth. A Chow asked why he was scared, since he was a retired soldier. But the guy, lowering his head, explained to the girl that he was a master of martial arts. She became seriously angry and started screaming and opened her mouth in amazement. Then the main character came up and said that their soldiers should be ashamed to become like him. The guy was very surprised and opened his mouth to ask what he had just said. Suddenly, a young man approached and straightened up and asked everyone to immediately stand. A Chow was surprised when she saw Han Li from the Dragon City squad and said that now there would definitely be no problems. The young man approached Ningbei and immediately knelt before him. He said that he greeted the king of the north. The guys around were just shocked and asked who this man was and what he just said. The girl grabbed her cheeks with both hands and blushed, almost losing consciousness. The fat man told Mrs. A Chow that she didn't care who he was, but he couldn't let this matter go. Then, behind their backs, a man asked how he couldn't let this matter go. It was the wolf of the eastern capital, Chao Dong, who asked him what he intended to do. The guy approached the main character and he told Chao Dong that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. They were very surprised to see the wolf of the eastern capital standing before them. Chao Dong asked Han if he really was from the Dragon City troop and served under Zhang Zhuanyuan. Then he told this guy that this was his land so he could clean up here himself. The boy bowed before him and replied, clenching his hands, that he obeyed him. After which he approached the girl and the fat man and looked at them very sternly. The Khan was indeed very strong and skillful and began to take out his weapon. The fat man and the restaurant owner were seriously frightened and blushed with fear. Ningbei approached him and asked him to stop, as there was no need to scare him. Otherwise he might even shit himself. He explained, looking into the boy's eyes, that since his arm had been broken, that was enough. He approached Chao Dong and, taking him by the shoulder, asked him to go. He remembered seeing his sister. Then the guy asked if he really said that he hadn't been home for many years, and that he should drop by to see them sometime. A Chow told brother Han that they were indeed to blame, since they didn't know who he was. The Khan replied that the king of the north would not be hostile to her, so he should do as he pleased. The girl smiled and said they were planning to suspend business for a while to correct their mistakes. They won't judge people by their appearance anymore. When she finished speaking, a young man, clutching his other injured arm, came running and addressed brother Han. He was very surprised and asked his comrade Fu Bo why he was wounded. Fu Bo was indeed wounded and said a wanted criminal had appeared. He stumbled upon him by chance and attempted to apprehend him, nearly dying in the process. Han asked him to go inside first and treat his wounds. Chow asked how that had happened. When the Khan had bandaged his wound, he asked his comrade who it was and what had happened. A Chow explained that she asked Juan and the others to close the door and not let anyone in. Meanwhile, the wounded comrade looked at Han with one eye and said that it was Geng Bao. Han was very surprised that such a great warrior as Zhen Bao, an assassin of such caliber, could do such a thing. He took the phone in his hands and said that in their city only Commander Xiao could stop him. Suddenly, the girl and the boy turned their heads towards the door, on which someone was knocking. The Khan, seriously frightened, broke out in beads of sweat and said that someone was breaking in here. Indeed, they continued to knock on the door and a big guy appeared on the threshold and opened the door. He simply knocked down the door with one deft movement and the boy recognized Zhen Bao. The man winked at him and, smiling, exclaimed that this was very good and he knew who he was. The guy explained that he had already reported to his commander and that he could run while he still could. But Zhen Bao started laughing and asked if he really wanted him to escape. He would still have time to finish him off before that. We need to try to hold him off until the commander arrives, the boy decided, pulling out his sword. When he pulled the sword out of its sheath, he began to swing it, but the guy very deftly dodged the blow. He clenched his fist, which was approaching the boy's face, and hit him with all his might. The blow was very powerful and strong, so Khan flew far back, hitting his back. His wounded comrade Fubo asked him to leave and said that he would support him. The Khan, wiping away the blood, said that it had never happened that someone who was afraid of the City of Dragons would abandon their own and run away. Gang Bao closed one eye again, glanced at the guy and said that he was very bored. Another blow flew towards the boy and he turned over and hit his back. The bandaged comrade also waved his fist to protect his boss. Gang Bao spread his arms wide and called them losers from Dragon City. He exclaimed that they would both die today. But suddenly, a boy appeared behind him and exclaimed that they would definitely not die today. Khan was very surprised and asked the main character why they came back. Ningbei explained that he heard something unusual happening here, so he decided to go in and take a look. Fubo said he didn't know who he was and asked him to run away. This man was a warrior-level assassin and he couldn't defeat him. Then the man clenched his fist and asked the main character if he thought he could escape from him. But when he tried to strike Ningbei, the boy very dexterously dodged and grabbed the sword with his hand. He looked at him carefully and said that in battle, if he dropped his sword, he would die immediately. He asked him not to repeat the mistake again, and the boys stared at the boy in surprise. Zhen Bao was also surprised and looked at him with one eye and asked who he was. The main character silently looked into his eyes and his gaze was very eerie and unyielding. Ningbei held a sharp long sword in his hands and clenched the fist of his other hand as he approached his opponent. Zhen Bao also clenched his fist and, waiting for the blow, asked the boy who he was. The main character smiled, began to take out his sword and exclaimed that he was the king of the north. He swung his sword and attempted to strike his opponent, who grimaced and began to fly back. The main character was very serious and the guys were simply shocked watching what was happening. The wounded guy asked what it was all about, and this high-level warrior died without even having time to react. The boy approached the wounded soldier and, handing him the sword, told him it was a good one. Ningbei asked him not to lose it again. Suddenly, Jinyun appeared at the threshold and waved his hand to the boy with a satisfied look. But when he saw what happened here, he immediately covered his mouth with his hands. The girl also wanted to ask her brother what happened there, but he asked her not to look there. Yuxin hugged her brother and asked why he was feeling so nauseous. The protagonist approached the boys and asked them to leave. The girl continued to ask what exactly had happened. The boy replied that everything was fine. He just helped deal with one killer. Yuxin asked where the killer was, and her brother pointed with his hand that they were everywhere. Yuxin, holding a frying pan in her hands, smiled and explained to the boys that the food was ready. She set the table with a variety of dishes and asked the children to begin eating. There were indeed many dishes on the table and they looked wonderful and smelled enticing. But suddenly, Jin Yong exclaimed that he wasn't hungry. He asked the boy if he could really eat after that, and Ningbei told him to get used to it. Xiao Yunxiang mentioned that he was going to join the Dragon City forces. They usually do not accept members of wealthy families, so they are so worried that they will use their position for the benefit of their family, and the scene he witnessed today was the daily life of a warrior from the Dragon City group. Jin Yun began to say that he understood everything and no longer wanted it. Suddenly, a woman appeared on the threshold and asked Yuxin if they had a guest today. The girl immediately stood up and told her mother that she was going to introduce Ningbei to her. The boy immediately looked at the woman in surprise when he spoke about the Ning family. The woman immediately said she knew Ning Hao, the strongest of the third generation of the 7 great families. Yuxin asked her mother why she mentioned him. The main character thanked him for the hospitality and said that it was already late, so he had to go. Yuxin approached the boy and remarked that he hadn't even eaten. If he didn't like it, she'd ask the cook to make something else. Suddenly, a man appeared on the threshold and told the cook to really prepare a new table. The girl was surprised to see her father standing in front of her. Her father said she rarely brought boys home, so he wanted to see her too. Yuxin blushed deeply, raised her hand, and told her father that he had misunderstood everything. Jinyun smiled and said that maybe it was a misunderstanding. But brother Ningbei was worthy of her anyway. The girl clenched her fist and begged her brother not to talk nonsense. As he wasn't her fiancé, Jinyun asked what the big deal was and said that, in any case, the Su family had simply called off the engagement. The girl's father was very surprised and asked if he really was the same Ningbei. He approached the boy and asked if he had threatened him on the phone earlier that day. Ningbei replied that he was not making a threat, but was merely bringing information to his attention. The man clenched his fists and exclaimed, "What did he say about throwing his family out of the Dragon City? Doesn't he consider that a threat?" Ningbei replied that as long as he didn't take away Tong Yuxin's achievements, this would never happen. The man angrily told his daughter that she shouldn't interfere in their affairs. Yuxin told her father that Ningbei was just joking and asked him not to take it seriously. Jinyun also said that her brother was right and that he was always making fun of her. The girl asked her brother not to create more problems. Xiaobei's mother appeared at the door and told him he knew who Yuxin was. If he wanted to be her boyfriend, it wouldn't work. The main character immediately turned his head to the side and the woman asked who he was. Then the boy glanced over and asked the woman if she knew who he was. The man said that of course they knew, and he was just the abandoned son of the Ning family. Jinyun clenched his fists and asked his father to calm down, as the boy had long since returned to the Ning family. His father asked his son to be quiet and asked what he could possibly know about this. Ningbei told the man that since he didn't trust his son, he could check for himself. Then he asked what exactly he wanted to check and whether he was really giving him a handkerchief. Ningbei replied that the Tang family had strong connections, so they might be able to find out what it was. However, He advised him to be overly cautious. Suddenly, the man's gaze changed dramatically and beads of sweat began to run down his face. He cast an attentive glance at the main character and the boy turned away from him, deep in thought. The man actually saw a scarf in front of him and became curious. But on this scarf there was a picture of a golden dragon, which seemed to be in a white haze. Unexpectedly for everyone, the phone rang and the guys all glanced at the receiver. The man was surprised that Uncle Yoon was calling him personally, and he only wanted to know where the handkerchief came from. The man responded by asking what kind of stupid jokes he was making, and that he was apparently tired of living if he dared to mess with him. Then he asked Uncle Yoon if he was exaggerating, and what the meaning of this scarf was. The uncle asked him not to offend the owner of this scarf, and that he was prepared to kneel before meeting him. Then the man, covered in sweat, asked who he was. Uncle Yoon replied that all 5 great generals were his subordinates. The protagonist looked at the man carefully. He simply did not expect such a turn of events and, clutching his head in his hands, hung up the phone. Then the boy turned to the man and asked if he recognized who he was. He and Yuxin were friends, and she invited him over, that's all. There was no talk of anything else. The boy said sadly, looking down, that he would go and handed the map to the girl. She looked closely at the card with the golden dragon and asked what it was. The main character smiled at the girl and asked her to take it, saying that no one would dare to intimidate the owner of this card. The whole family looked closely at the boy who was already heading towards the door. The father asked his daughter to let him take a photo of the card. He decided to ask Uncle Yoon what it was. Jinyun asked his father to relax. Why worry about brother Ningbei? He's a strong warrior, so what? Then the father turned to the boy and asked if he really thought he was just a warrior. Jinyun turned to his sister and asked her if what their father was saying was true. The man asked Uncle Yoon to look at the photo he had just sent him. Uncle remarked that they were incredibly lucky and were protected by this gentleman. From now on, no one in the 3 central provinces would dare touch them. Jinyong asked grandfather to explain more clearly who this brother Ningbei was. The uncle continued to explain to the boys and said, turning to the girl, that there are only 2 types of such cards. One card is for killing and the other is only for defense. If she has a defense order, then the entire northern garrison protects her. No one in the world would dare intimidate her. When Jinyun listened to his uncle, he was simply shocked and asked if it was really such a cool thing. Then the father agreed with his uncle and began to wipe the beads of sweat from his face. Wiping his sweat with a handkerchief, he said that tomorrow he would collect generous gifts and go to the Ning family to apologize to them. The vast, beautiful Ning estate lay before us. The stars shone very brightly. The woman asked Chinhei to wait a little longer and said that Ningbei would be back soon. But the girl said that no, and that he was probably busy right now, so she would go. Having said this, she turned around and walked away, and the main character looked carefully ahead. The woman stood with sad eyes when suddenly a boy appeared behind her. She turned her head in his direction and was very surprised when he appeared in front of her. She asked if he was back and said that Chinny had just left. She asked him to catch up with her quickly before it was too late. But the main character told the woman that he did not want to talk to her, and he was firm in his decision. He explained to the woman that it was too late and she should go to bed. After he said this, he headed towards the door and suddenly Khan appeared behind him. The boy asked him what was going on, and Han replied that something had happened to the Xiao family. Then the boy turned his head and said that it seemed like Xiaodong had recently returned and what could have happened. Ningbei decided to go and see for himself in this case and moved into the room. There were people lying in front of him and he asked Xiao Yunshan what happened and where Xiaodong was now. Xiao Yunshan said with tears in his eyes that he tried to stop that wolf dong from doing something stupid, but he couldn't. The boy asked to talk about it inside, and they went inside. There, in front of them, sat a girl wrapped in a blanket. This girl was sitting on the couch, and the woman was asking her to stop crying, and the man holding the wand was calling these scoundrels beasts. When the boy saw the girl, he called her by her name, Yijin, and he was very surprised when he saw her. The girl was also surprised. With tears in her eyes, she recognized her little brother. The main character came closer to her and asked what happened. The girl continued to cry and told the boy that they were bullying her. Ningbei, afraid for her, drew his eyebrows closer to his nose and asked who they were. Then a guy came up and explained that they had managed to find out that it was a Taibao from the Western District. The boy asked to convey an order from the King of the North to block the Dragon City for that night. The main character explained to everyone that whoever attacked this girl would regret it. The guy headed down the long corridor to carry out the order, clenching his fists. His eyes were shining with anger, and he was furious because he did not understand why this happened. The main character was walking along the same alley, and this boy appeared behind him. He asked his brother not to stop him, and Ningbei explained that he was not here to stop him. His sister is his sister too, and whoever attacked the sister of the King of the North must die. The guy asked the boys if they had come here to drink and gave them a contemptuous look, but the enraged boy clenched his fist and answered the man that he was looking for someone. The guard said that judging by his aggressive appearance, it looked like he had come here to create problems. The protagonist approached the guard and thrust his hand forward in front of his face. With one deft movement, he grabbed him by the face and threw him far, far away into the street. The boys couldn't understand what just happened and why he flew away with a light wave of his hand. The main character was caught up with by his friend who wanted to learn from him and called him the King of the North. When Ningbei turned to him, he said that he would take care of finding him. The main character immediately turned to him and chuckled, agreeing with the boy. And now they were entering a room in which there were many people, and Ningbei's friend. The girl sat sadly in the cafe and had a glass of alcohol in her hand. When she saw the main character, she said that he still liked to boast about his power. Then the boy approached her and asked what she was doing there. The girl replied that it was none of his business, and he placed his hand on his glass of alcohol. He explained that once he resolved his issue, he would take her home. Then the girl stood up from her chair and exclaimed that she had not asked him to worry about this. They are not connected in any way, so what does he want from her? She said this with tears in her eyes. The boy closed his eyes and said that he had sent a message to her family and that they would come for her soon. The girl started waving her fists and exclaimed that he didn't even want to see her, and why did he care about her? She raised her hand to hit him, but he grabbed her wrist and said it was dangerous for a girl to be here alone. He asked if she knew what had happened to Xiaodong's sister. Then the girl, blushing a little, asked the main character if he was worried about her. She asked him to let go of her hand, and he stared at the girl intently. The protagonist's comrade exclaimed that he had found a Taibao man. The one he grabbed said that he served the Taibao, and asked how he dared touch him. A fair-haired guy appeared in front of them and, taking out a weapon, asked him to answer right now where the Taibao was. Ningbei asked Xiaodong not to stain his sword with the blood of innocence, to which the boy replied that he was not innocent. They were confronted by guys with big bats, and one of them asked if they were causing trouble. He told them to get out of there immediately. Ningbei gave him a disdainful look and also began to take out his weapon. He threw the sword towards the scoundrel, and his eyes glowed with a bright, bloody light. The guy didn't expect such a turn of events, and a sharp sword ran across his throat. He immediately fell to the floor, and people around him screamed in horror that he was dead. Ningbei explained to the people that he had taken 4 lives and therefore deserved to die. The boy was surprised that the king remembered the personal files of all the criminals, or he could determine the number of those killed by their aura. The girl appeared behind the boy and asked what he had done and why they were all shouting. Ningbei asked her to turn away and not look there. He said he heard someone looking for him. One scoundrel asked who the greyhound was who dared to cause trouble in his bar. The guy was simply shocked when he saw a familiar tattoo on his shoulder. Xiaodong looked at him carefully and also noticed the association of the black sword. The guy stood opposite this guy with a tattoo and looked at each other. The protagonist realized that people with such a tattoo are all mortal enemies of the King of the North. Ningbei walked up to the girl and covered her with a sheet as she lay in the corner of the cafe. Xiaodong was ready to fight the enemy who was already approaching them faster and faster. He looked at his opponent carefully and exclaimed, mentioning the association of the black sword. One of the boys said that since he knew this, he was probably afraid, but it was too late. The second exclaimed that if Bao Ye had his way, none of them would survive. Ningbei thought that the Black Sword Association was the sworn enemy of the Northern Army, powerful enough to have not been destroyed yet. He looked closely at his opponent and decided that this man was simply one of the 6s. Bao Ye approached the boy and asked what was wrong and if he'd wet himself. It was too late to rush around, and today they were in for a battle of warriors that would end in death. Xiaodong cast a contemptuous glance at the scoundrel and said that he was not worthy of this. Then the guy asked if he really thought so and wanted to know what the person who said that was capable of. Xiaodong held out his sword and said that he was a member of the association and should recognize this sword. Then one of the guys asked what he was showing them and why anyone would know about this stupid sword. Did he think he could scare them with this knife? Du Baoye realized that he recognized him as a member of the Black Sword Association and that this sword was the sword of the King of the North. The comrade told Mr. Ningbei that perhaps the association had some plans here and that it might be worth intervening with them. The boy replied that there was no point in staying there and that the small fry couldn't know anything valuable here. The comrade agreed with the protagonist, and they began to get up from their chairs. Bao Ye felt a pressure that could suppress 1,000 people, and it was truly the level of the god of war. He was really scared and was afraid that he wouldn't be able to escape and would have to fight. Xiaodong said that this was exactly the kind of look that people from the Black Ball Association should have. He hoped the boy would entertain him. Bao Ye started shouting and asking who he was. The protagonist answered the villain that this guy's name was Xiaodong, and didn't he know about it? When Bao Ye heard this name, he realized that the wolf dong was in front of him, and beads of sweat began to flow down his face. He was simply shocked and became curious about who his comrade was. Xiaodong grabbed his sword and began to approach his enemy, saying that he didn't need to know who he was. But suddenly some guy approached them and asked them to stop immediately. Holding out a phone, he approached the blonde man and explained that he had to pick up this man. Xiaodong asked him if all of them were so disobedient and uncontrollable. Zuo Chongtang of Qinzhou greeted the King of the North and bowed before him. Bao Ye sweated even more and was surprised when he heard about the King of the North. Could this be the same person who reached the level of the God of War at the age of 9? On the night he became the God of War, a king-level figure crossed the border and started a war just for him. He was simply horrified and could not understand how he could have fallen into his hands. The main character continued to sit at the table and look at the girl who was sleeping drunk on the sofa. Xiaodong looked at the guy and he couldn't understand what had happened to him because he hadn't done anything. The main character's comrade also came very close to him and leaned over to look at him. He turned to Xiaodong and explained to the boy that the man had died of fright. Then those around also looked and were simply shocked by such a death. Zhua Zhongtang said that since this man was dead, he would not bother Lord Ningbei anymore. Ningbei suddenly turned to him and said that since he was here, he shouldn't rush to leave. When Zuo Zhongtang heard this phrase, he began to sweat and immediately bowed before him. Ningbei continued to sit at the table and drink juice. He offered the boy some tea. Zuo Zhongtang bowed before him and said that he did not dare to do this, and Xiaodong approached him. He put his foot on it and asked it to be remembered for the future, that it was not for him to tell Beiliang's member what to do. His brother had said he would kill him, but he wanted to take it away. Where did he get such impudence? Zuo Zhongtang replied that he just wanted to solve this small problem for the master. Xiaodong leaned over him again and asked him if he had come to the Dragon City to spy on his brother. The boy protested, saying how he could possibly spy on the master and that it wasn't true. Xiaodong immediately kicked him and told him to get lost. He turned to his elder brother and said that this man's appearance was clearly connected to him. Ningbei remarked that indeed, and why else would someone with the status of the deputy head of the Central China Group appear in Dragon City? He came here supposedly to visit his family, but in reality for the sake of recovery. Outsiders don't know how serious his injury is, so they sent someone to check on him. Someone doesn't want him to return north alive? Xiaodong asked his elder brother to summon Lao Chu and the others. As his safety was paramount, Ningbei replied that the security of the northern border was paramount. The transfer of personnel could not be carried out lightly. Before he could finish speaking, his friend entered the room and he was very excited. He asked why the boy brought his sister to such a place. Ningbei told Jinyong that he was making things up and started to get up from his chair. He explained to the boy as he approached the middle of the bar that they had met there by chance. The boy approached his father and asked if he was still asleep, approaching the chair. The father answered the main character that he had arrived on time and that he really wanted to talk to him. They need to resolve one issue. Ning Changhai's family tree. He wants Ningbei to join the Ning Group's board of directors and serve there. The protagonist inquired about those people and said that he would deal with this issue tomorrow. Father asked them not to be too radical in this matter. In the end, they contributed to the development of Ning's group. The boy smiled, hugged the folder to himself and answered his father that he knew about it. Then he turned his gaze to the side, and he was very serious and a little sad. The father also stared at his son, and he looked a little older and tired. A few days have passed since the environment has largely recovered and the wild animal population has increased. Dragon City officials are reminding everyone to limit visits to Baishan to avoid wild animal attacks. Ningbei watched the news on television and thought that using television to warn ordinary people of danger in Baishan was a common tactic employed by special operations forces. After all, they couldn't possibly announce that soldiers were there. A woman entered the room, told him he hadn't had breakfast yet, and asked him to try some red bean porridge. The boy immediately took the plate from his mother. She asked if it was tasty, and Ningbei replied that it was very good and that she had probably been waiting a long time to cook for him again. The mother smiled and replied that it wasn't her who cooked it, but Chin He. She said she wanted to apologize to him for what happened that time. Suddenly, the protagonist's gaze changed completely, and he immediately stepped aside, bending over. His mother asked what had happened to him. Jinny appeared in the room and told the boy that he had gone too far. I just said it was very tasty, but when I heard what she cooked, I spat it all out. And what was it that disgusted him so much? She wanted to apologize and make peace with him, but he did this. The girl said this and started running out of the room. The main character was very weak and thought that the porridge was poisoned. Jinny continued to cry and ran out of the house, wiping away her bitter tears and heading to a certain place. She ran very quickly and found herself next to her brother, who asked what had happened. The girl answered her brother, wiping away her tears, that she would never go to him again and that he was just a scoundrel. Jinyun got angry and asked how he dared to bully his sister. Even if he has to face the Ning family, he will achieve justice. Jinyun ran into the room heading towards the main character, being very angry. But the boy turned towards him and asked him to leave immediately because he felt very bad. The guy didn't expect to see him in such a state and asked what happened to him. The woman explained that he ate the red bean porridge that Shinhee brought and became ill. She couldn't understand what was happening and whether she needed to call an ambulance or go to the hospital. But the boy grabbed his mother by the hand and asked her not to do it and not to worry. Ningbei asked his comrade to quickly close the door and he did so immediately. He asked what was wrong with the porridge and if this couldn't be happening. His sister had worked all morning to prepare it. Ningbei asked to listen to him and said that the fact that he had been poisoned must not be spread. But whoever did it wouldn't dare attack without knowing the details. He asked his comrade to leave immediately and explained that they should continue swearing and acting as they had when they came in. No one should notice anything unusual. Jinyun asked how such a thing could happen. Jinhee would never harm him. Ningbei angrily exclaimed that she shouldn't know anything and that it had nothing to do with her. He asked to remove the guilty expression from his face and not let Jinhee or anyone else find out anything. Otherwise, they would be in danger. Did he understand what he had just told him? Jinyun replied with sadness in his eyes that he understood everything. The main character, wiping the poison from his lips, asked the boy to remember his words. Then he asked him again to leave, and if anyone asked, to say that he simply threw away the porridge without eating a spoonful. Jinyun became very angry, clenched his teeth and exclaimed that he had humiliated his sister. He flushed with anger, beads of sweat streaming down his face. He exclaimed that from now on, the Ning and Su families were mortal enemies. He harbored anger in his heart and very rudely closed the door and left the room. Ningbei thought that this was a king-level poison that an ordinary person would never be able to obtain. Surely someone has infiltrated the Su family? Now these families are in danger and the poison needs to be removed quickly. When her brother approached her, Jinhye asked her worriedly if he had said anything. Jinyun sat behind the wheel of the car and, looking ahead, asked the girl to remember she didn't see Ningbei eat the porridge she brought him. If anyone asked, she should simply say he threw it away without even trying it. And that was very important. The girl couldn't understand why and asked her brother about it, looking at him with horror. Jinyun explained that if she didn't want Ningbei to die and didn't want to put their family in danger, then she had to do as he said. The girl was simply shocked and did not understand what was happening. With tears in her eyes, staring at her brother, she answered him that she understood everything, and then her brother suddenly looked towards the car in which there were people who wanted to say something. He began to think that something was wrong here, and that there was clearly someone on the roof of the car. There really was some guy standing in the car who wished harm on him and his sister. The enemy continued to stand on the roof of the car, and he was determinedly against him. Jinyun thought about the fact that he didn't even notice when that guy jumped onto the roof. Surely he heard everything that he just said to his sister, and what should he do? The main character, when the boy was next to him, asked him to remember the number. When he dialed the guy, the person on the other end of the line asked who it was. Jinyun exclaimed that Ningbei said that if he was in danger, he should call. Before he could finish speaking, the guy who was on the roof was already inside the car. Jinyun tried to control his driving to avoid driving off the road. The traffic continued and the car swerved along the road, creating dangerous accident situations. When the guy appeared next to him, Jinyun fearfully asked who he was. The boy replied that this was to be expected of the king of Ningbei. Despite already being poisoned by the insect's venom, he was still able to construct a labyrinth and almost outwit him. Jinyun replied that if he had a grudge against Ningbei, he should go to him and not make things difficult for them. The boy then replied that he simply didn't understand how terrible King Ningbei was. The guy said that even if he was poisoned by a royal-level poison, if you don't manage to attack him in the first minute, it's certain death. Jinhye was very surprised and scared that he was poisoned. Not understanding what it all meant and what happened to Ningbei, the man sitting in the passenger seat asked the bride if she was the king of the North's bride. Jinyun explained to the enemy that Jinhye had already broken off her engagement with Ningbei, and he asked him not to touch her. Suddenly, the guy approached the girl's brother and hit him with all his might on the neck. He approached the girl sitting in the back seat and offered to make a deal. He said that if she followed him voluntarily, he would not kill her brother. Jinhye was very worried and, blushing a little, answered the guy that she agreed. Before us is the Ning family home. Spacious and bright, Xiaodong runs out to the protagonist. He approached the building and suddenly quickly dropped to one knee. There were people in front of them holding weapons in their hands, and one of them asked who he was. Xiaodong said without letting go of his sword that he was looking for Ningbei's elder brother. The boy sensed Ningbei's brother's aura, but he couldn't understand why it was so weak. The guys didn't let go of their swords, and the guy suddenly rushed into the room. When he opened the door, he was very surprised. He started calling the boy very loudly. He saw a woman standing next to Ningbei. There were tears in her eyes, and the boy was sitting in the lotus position. The man was simply shocked when he saw the boy and asked what happened to him. The woman explained to his father, with tears in her eyes, that he had eaten one spoonful of porridge. When Xiaodong approached the main character, he said that this was the poison of a very dangerous insect. He became very angry and clenched his fist, exclaiming that someone was tired of living. Jinyun ran very quickly towards the protagonist, out of breath from running. When he opened the door, he screamed, clutching his heart with his hand, that Jinhye had been kidnapped. Xiaodong asked him to get out and said that now was not the time to deal with his family's affairs. Before they could finish speaking, they heard some kind of sound like an explosion. In front of them stood Ningbei, who was standing on his feet and asked what had happened to Jinhye. Xiaodong didn't expect the boy to be involved with a girl right now. Ningbei again inquired about Jinhye's situation. Jinyun explained that he'd driven her by car and told her what he'd heard along the way. Who could have known there'd be an enemy on the roof? The guy grabbed his head and exclaimed that he heard everything, and then took Jinhye away. Ningbei listened carefully to this guy and asked him to stay here. Jinyun tearfully begged the protagonist to save his sister, holding his hands to his heart. When Xiaodong approached the boy, he explained that he had said that he would protect the Su family, and he would not break his promise. He said that he would protect Jinhye for the rest of his life, and he would never break that promise. The boy raised his hand and told Xiaodong, the commander of the 7th Northern Army, to listen to his order. In the name of the Northern King, he orders the Dragon City to be closed, Jinhye to be found, and her to be returned. The guy picked up a golden card with a picture of a dragon and immediately said that he would obey him. The leader and many warriors were already in front of the main character. The man exclaimed that he had received a message from the King of the North and asked where they were headed. Ningbei asked them to simply follow the orders they had received. The man bowed before him and said that he would send someone to accompany him. The boy responded with a stern look that this was unnecessary and that he forbade him to follow him. The man immediately obeyed him, and the entire platoon was lined up and ready to attack at any time. Meanwhile, the boy had already headed towards the forest thicket where it was dense and green. He said that they had followed him all the way here, so they were almost there. The main character was surrounded by warriors who were already approaching him with weapons. They surrounded him from all sides and he found himself trapped. The men wore black robes and clenched their fists and weapons. The boy placed his hand on his heart and said he was glad to meet His Majesty. He held in his arms the girl the protagonist had come to protect. Ningbei said he was from the Black Sword Association, which specialized in assassinations. His target was him, so he asked for Chinhei to be released. But the guy explained that the King of the North is strong even in this state, so he does not dare let her go. Then, the boy looked menacingly into his eyes and asked if he thought he was negotiating with him. The guy said the poison of the 7 insects and 7 herbs is extremely deadly. One drop can kill thousands of people, and yet he's still standing here. If he is not mistaken, he used silver needles to seal the poison in his body. The guy said that if this girl was so important to him, then he should take out the needles. His eyes glowed with anger and hatred, and he exclaimed that he wanted to see how he died from poison. Chinhei was very scared, but she tearfully begged the boy not to listen to him. The main character looked closely at the girl and called her by name. He explained that he had promised his grandmother to protect her for the rest of his life, and he would not abandon her like the wind. Then the enemy said that he really didn't expect that this girl was so important to him. Chinhei cried out with tears in her eyes that this was what irritated her the most. Ningbei looked closely at his opponent and the girl who was next to him. Chinhei remarked that all he talked about was her grandmother. He only wanted to marry her because of her. So what was she to him then? She broke off the engagement, and everyone started saying that she had left him and broken his heart. The girl started screaming with tears in her eyes and asked if anyone thought about her heart. For the sake of his promise to his grandmother, he was ready to marry her and was not at all happy about it. The protagonist listened to what she had just said and drew his own conclusions. Suddenly, he smiled and understood what it was all about. Then, she asked him why he was laughing and whether he was laughing at her. Ningbei smiled and said that keeping his word was very important to him. But he was going to marry her not only because of the promise and he really likes her. Chinhei didn't expect this turn of events and was very surprised why he suddenly said this. And the enemy got angry and exclaimed that they had found a place to flirt. Now they had to think about whether she would survive at all or not. Ningbei said that it was his fault, but her proposal to break off the engagement was also offensive, so they could consider themselves even. Chinhei asked what he was talking about and said that he was obviously the one who made the mistake first. While they were talking, the enemy had already pulled out a knife and asked her not to be so arrogant. If he didn't pull out the silver needle, he would kill her right now. Ningbei's gaze changed. He asked her not to touch him and promised to pull out the needle. The boy had already put 2 fingers close to his neck, and everything around him began to glow with a golden light. Chinhei began to cry tearfully and blushed, asking the boy not to do this under any circumstances. Bright golden light, like lightning, was scattered in different directions. Suddenly, this scoundrel's men began to fall one after another from a bright, powerful light. Streams of scarlet blood began to flow from their mouths. The boy exclaimed that this poison was worthy of its fame. The protagonist sat on one knee and said that now he must fulfill his promise. The enemy began to laugh and said that he could no longer make his demands while standing on the threshold of death. He explained to the boy that he would let her die with him. Ningbei said that was exactly what he had thought. Suddenly, his eyes lit up with a bright bloody light and he began to draw his sword. The enemy could not understand what was happening, and his eyes changed from fear and horror. The main character was already approaching him with the speed of the wind, and was already near a huge thick branch on which the enemy was. While he was approaching him, he had already killed many of his opponent's people along the way. Ningbei continued to struggle, and when he approached the tree, he grabbed the girl in his arms. The vortex continued to spin around the entire perimeter in the form of a white light and a long funnel. The boy actually killed a lot of people, and he asked the girl not to look at the killed people. Then he opened her eyes and, smiling, asked if their engagement was still valid. But for some reason the girl said that no, and the marriage arranged by her parents did not count. She wants him to propose to her and comes closer to him, hugging him. The main character looked closely into her eyes and immediately agreed to do it. He explained that this promise would be especially for her,